Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku was given a second chance part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story bajy from fanfiction. So let's start the video. If someone told me my life would take a drastic change for something that could only come true in dreams or fiction, that my whole world would literally be turned upside down on me after I would have to fight to stay alive, that I would be married to a man who was both different from the person who I met, loved, and was engaged to for a short while, and was someone who could only be as real as a fantasy novel. Not to mention he was someone I had been a fan of ever since his first TV debut. I would have thought that they were being silly or over-exaggerating too, told them that that was just crazy and sounds like something a fortune teller would say. I'm not into that sort of mumbo-jumbo. I'm not a fan of magic. To me that stuff is evil. Or 3. Just let slide and write it off as someone just being a jokester and just wanted to stir up a fuss or get attention. Depending on how the case went for those 3 scenarios. Well, to put it as simply as I can, I most certainly had been shocked beyond comprehension by all that had happened on that fateful day. I still cannot believe all that had happened since then, even after many years had passed and having accepted my new life in this world since that first day. It sometimes still feels like it's just a crazy dream I'm having to help me cope with the difficulties I had to deal with in my life before in the past, and that I would eventually wake to that sad reality, with the sad lingering feeling left behind from leaving this amazing dream. But I would always be proven wrong with the things that are now going on in my life. From the diary I wrote and to my friends and family who would remind me this was real, and I'm grateful to have been given such a life unlike any other and to have them in my life. Sure, there are still some difficulties I and the others had to face from time to time, but compared to before, this is no biggie in my opinion. Not to mention that was life, as each and every one of us goes through some sort of difficulty or problem or crisis in our individual lives in some way or another. But it's thanks to the people around us we love and cherish dear, and who love and cherish us as well, who are there for us and who can help us in our times of need when we need it. I'm not alone in this. And I'm thankful that I have such amazing people and wonderful loved ones in my life. Knowing that I do not have to face any of my problems alone makes me glad, even if I did sometimes tended or had to do a mission of my own solo in order to help set things right to the best of my abilities for things to get better. But you get my point, right? I know I seem like I am overemphasizing how grateful I am, but it's the truth. I truly am grateful for everything that I have now. I don't know what I would have done in my life if it weren't for the people that I have in it today. Well, honestly, I probably would have died that fateful day before I could ever hope to live for as long as I had to eventually write down the story this year as I slowly ease into retirement. I kid you not, I really would have died that day if it weren't for him, my loving husband. Knowing that the many dangers we had faced before in the past have long since been taken care of, and with permission from my husband after a long amount of deep consideration, I can now tell you about my life story, and even the secrets that were kept for so long for the sake of peace and for everyone's safety. The story I have only ever told to a select group of people. The story that's written here, not just of myself, by my whole family too, so that you can have the whole details of it. Whether you believe the story or not is up to you, as by the time any of you reads this story, both my husband and I myself would be nearing our end or had already reached it, whichever comes first. Yet, we have no regrets in our decision, as we know that it's inevitable, as we all must face it one day. Yet still our memories will still remain with those who knew us well as in this true story. I still remember how it came to be as clear as day, as I will now tell you my story, which all started on the day that changed my life forever, when I woke up with the feeling of the wind rushing against me so fast and hard, when I came to realize that I had no hope of surviving, or so I thought then. Looking back, it still feels like it just happened yesterday, all those years ago. All there was darkness, as my eyelids felt so heavy that I could barely even open them, feeling sore and exhausted beyond words as I try to scratch at my mind and recalling just why and how I felt sore and exhausted in the first place, as my mind felt foggy as I slowly, with some struggles, started to regain consciousness, feeling the wind rushing against me hard and fast, but not in a normal way. My limbs almost felt like they were paralyzed from the feels of the wind coming at me like this, feeling cold as the winds that came were not too kind to me in regards of temperature. It felt like I was dreaming, but I couldn't be, could I? No, I didn't want to believe that, as there is no way that I could ever feel this sore and exhausted, cold and practically paralyzed in a dream, as it felt too real to be one, especially as I struggled with all my might to open my eyes to try and stay conscious, to understand what was going on. As expected, everything was blurry when I opened my eyes as I kept blinking my eyes, trying to clear my vision as I was even more confused, trying to understand what I was seeing despite the blurriness. During this, I also recalled feeling something strapped to my back as it felt like I was carrying a giant backpack, and on my head I felt that I was wearing a biker's helmet, though something told me that it was more than that, and for a very big reason too. The more I regain consciousness, the more I start to realize that I wasn't just exhausted and sore, but I was also in pain as I felt that I had several injuries on me, though where they were I couldn't tell as I was still groggy and confused. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, my vision finally cleared as I realized that what I was seeing was the sky and the clouds as they seemed to be going upward fast. I thought to myself as I was trying to process what was going on. Why, is the sky going up? I wondered, still very confused, as this was not making sense to me. It was only then that I looked down on myself and saw the outfit I was wearing looked like it had seen better days, as there were not only some scorch marks here and there, but also few grazes, as the cuts on the white sweater I wore showed where they were, as I had one around my ribcage around the left side and one on my upper right arm, as well as on the charcoal black jeans that I wore, as there was one on my left thigh and two near my shin on the right side. I felt bruises that I couldn't see. There were even more than just a few measly scuffs on the midnight blue boots that I was wearing, as it looked like as if I had been walking through a battlefield. The black straps I could see did indeed belong to a backpack that was on my back, but I was trying to recall why I was carrying it in the first place, as well as why I was wearing a helmet, though I knew it was important, and something told me that I would remember very soon, even if I didn't know why I felt that, though I was grateful. Not only was my outfit damaged, but also pretty dirty, as it looked as if I've been crawling on the forest floor for hours on end. Why is my outfit in practical shambles? This backpack, this helmet, on my head, what's going on? I thought to myself, hating the fact that I was too disoriented to understand what was happening and not having the answers. It was then that I looked up. What I saw left me in awe. It looked like a city, like the kind you would see in an anime movie or TV show. It was big and looked beautiful, and it seemed to be getting closer to me. That was when I started to put the pieces together. The sky moving up fast, me in an wrecked state, a city coming at me. Wait, That was when I finally snapped out of it, as the horrifying realize made me wake up completely, as I now knew that I was falling out of the sky at an undetermined height that will most definitely kill a man, and I was going to die. As my voice remembered that it was there, I screamed for my life as I flailed weakly and helplessly. I'm pretty sure that my scream could break a fine wine glass. I had no way to save myself. There was no way anyone was going to be able to save me, let alone see me in time to get help. I'm not pessimistic, but I know reality when it's right in front of me. I was going to die. I fruitlessly tried to cover my head, shutting my eyes in fear as I waited for the end to hit me. No one could save me. But it can't end like this. No. I don't want to die yet. It's too soon. Please. Someone. Anyone. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳. Fear not, young miss. You are safe now, for I am here. That was when my eyes snapped open when I heard that masculine voice, a voice I've always known for the past few years. But it couldn't be, could it? I thought to myself, as all of a sudden, I felt a pair of gentle but very muscular and strong arms wrapped around me, being carried bridal style, so fast that I flinched as I desperately clung with what little strength I had onto the mysterious stranger, as I buried my face into his equally strong, muscular, and gentle chest, as I felt him holding me close, tightly though carefully, like I were a baby, making sure I wouldn't be harmed. I felt the wind change so suddenly that I thought I would have whiplash, as dizziness hit me hard as I tried to make it stop, as I buried my face more as some sort of way to ground myself. Faintly I heard him say we were almost on the ground, though I couldn't concentrate, as I felt like I was going to faint, as the true depth of soreness and exhaustion struck me tenfold. But I couldn't lose consciousness now, not now. I had to know if it really is him, if it's who I know it is, or if I was dreaming. I thought to myself as eventually I felt the rapid winds quailed, and I was shaking like a rattlesnake tail. I felt his large, again, strong but still warm and gentle right hand gently stroke my back as he comforted me. Sure. It's okay, miss. You're safe now. I promise. Oh no, I'm going to faint. I got him. I thought to myself, even though I couldn't finish that sentence, as I looked up to see his face gazing down at me. Despite blurriness coming in again, I could clearly see him, his nice sort of dark light tan skin, his sunflower yellow hair which had most of it slicked back and his bangs were pointed upward in the shape of a V, his silver bronze age costume perfectly showing off his incredibly chiseled muscle-bound physique, and most importantly on these last two things, his deep electric blue eyes which had a beautiful spark in them like an electric storm brewing as I saw clear emotion in them as they showed concern and reassurance as he flashed me his bright and reassuring signature smile. It is him. Really it. All might. 'Twas what my last words were before everything went black once again. In all my years as a police detective, never had I been left this baffled in before. One minute, Toshi and I were just out on a walk, chatting about during our break when suddenly he spotted something up high in the sky. At the time I didn't know what I was seeing. It wasn't until we heard screaming coming from it that we realized that it was a person and they were falling to their demise. As always, Toshi quickly shifted into his hero form before he leapt into action to save her, as the screaming sounded like a female, before it was too late as he left a gust of wind, not enough to knock me over thankfully, from where he stood. Not too long after, he returned with the woman in his arms, shaking violently undoubtedly from nearly falling to her death. Her appearance was definitely a cause for concern as she looks as if she had just crawled out of a battlefield, as her long-sleeve sweater, jeans, boots, backpack and helmet all looked like they've seen better days. Whatever happened to this woman, I have no doubt it's anything but good. As Toshi went to comfort her to try and calm her down, she managed to look up and say his name before she lost consciousness right there. Getting a good look at her face before she did, I could see that she looks like she was 18, maybe barely, and had pale tan. There was no physical hair poking out from under her helmet, but then again that could be because she had her hair trimmed very short. She had eyebrows, but the thing was there was no hair for where the eyebrow should be, even though around that area was pronounced enough to see where her brows would be. Her eyes were a very deep but very clear shade of amethyst. For a moment before they closed, I could see in her eyes showed several different emotions at once, so I couldn't tell what they were before she finally fainted. But by looking at her face, I could tell that she was very worn out and exhausted. It looked almost as if she had been in an uphill battle for years and years. The state on her body made it clear that she was injured and needed to go to the hospital immediately. Tsukachi, I didn't see any planes while I was up there rescuing her, so someone must have used some sort of teleportation quirk to warp her up there, and judging by the state she's in, undoubtedly it was to try and kill her. If not, then maybe she teleported up there herself, not knowing how high up she was, and due to her state she was too exhausted, in pain and worn out to save herself while trying to escape from whoever was trying to kill her. Toshinori told me as he tried to guess which scenario it was. Both sounded feasible, but for now we don't have all the answers. Right now, first things first, she needs medical treatment. All Might. We turned to the source of the voice to see Recovery Girl and Sansa running straight at us in concern. They must have seen him jump to save this woman. I don't think it's a coincidence to see you around this area, ma'am, I said as Toshi knelt down so that the older hero could get a good look at her. You guessed correctly. Sansa here called me to help some of his colleagues who only just got back from apprehending a gang not too long ago. Since I was in the area as I was making my way back to UA after taking care of business in the hospital several streets down, it wasn't too much trouble to come down to help mend their wounds. He insisted on escorting me to the train station to say thank you for the assistance. It seems that that was the right choice to make on my part considering circumstances now. She replied as she soon had a look of concern. The poor dear. We need to take her back to the Pinnacle so I can get a good look at her. I'll make sure the men wing is clear for you, I told her as she nodded. And I already have my medical bag right here, she said as she pointed to the black bag she had in her hand. If her condition gets even worse, then we'll need to take her to the hospital. Then let's get moving. The longer we wait, the worse her condition might get. While you tend to her, we'll try to figure out who she is and who might be trying to kill her. All Might said as we all nodded as we immediately ran to the police station not too far from where we stood. Funny enough, we were actually on our way back when all this happened. Sansa, please hold my calls for me until further notice, and get some of our men on the streets to ask around to see if anybody might know her, as well as some to examine her bag for any information on her, I told him. Understood. He nodded firmly as we trod back to the station. That was about an hour and a half ago, yet despite our efforts nothing came up. I sighed as I shut my laptop, nursing a headache as my concern only grew. The good news was that there wasn't any missing persons reports right now, and there didn't seem to be any villains in the area that might be a cause for concern or seem to be connected to this case. But the bad news was that this led us to a dead end. Until we can know what her name is, we're just going to have to wait until she actually wakes up. The men who were on the street gathering information only just got back recently and stated that there is nobody in the area who knew anybody of her description. Considering the possibility of teleportation, it might be that she might not be from Kyoto but maybe from another part of Japan or maybe outside of it. It seemed to be most likely case. Sadly, there wasn't anything in her luggage that could tell us anything either. Least not now. Upon hearing knock at the door, which knocked me out of my train of thought, I told the knocker to come in as the door opened to reveal Toshi, who was out patrolling to survey the area to ensure our guests' safety, as he had 2 cups of coffee in each hand, one being for him and one obviously being for me. Knowing what he's about to ask, I relayed to him what I couldn't find at the moment about our guest as I sipped the coffee I accepted from him as the caffeine started to help to ease my headache a bit. He shared the same expression as me, concerned about this, as he told me that while thankfully nothing happened during his patrol, he too couldn't find anyone who might have been the culprit behind this. "This is troubling," he stated. "Yup, unless we have a clue, we're at a dead right." I agreed. "You'll find out soon enough. You're one of the best police detectives I know. If anybody can solve this, it's you," he told me with a comforting smile, a real one, not a fake. He plasters on his face in his all-might form, which he was still in. "Thanks, Toshi." I smiled back with a chuckle. My friend always knows just how to cheer me up. Just then, thought popped up in my head as I asked him, "By the way, any news from Recovery Girl?" "I knew you were going to ask me that eventually. I just got the news from Recovery Girl not too long ago. Thankfully, she's stable and still unconscious, but otherwise resting. The most she's suffering from is extreme exhaustion and exertion. The rest for wounds are only superficial, so they won't leave any scars, just mild scrapes, bruises, light bullet grazes, and some minor burns. She said it would be best to wait until she gets some of her energy back before she used her quirk to heal them up so she won't accidentally comatose her." Though what?" I asked him. Honestly, what she told me still surprises me. I didn't think anybody could have a condition like this, but apparently it's real. "What condition?" "According to her, the girl has a rare condition called, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, alopecia universalis, to simply put it, as she didn't want me to be lost in the long explanation. It's a condition that prevents her from ever growing hair, and I mean literally any kind of hair, not just hair around her head but also eyebrow hair, eyelashes, armpit hair. Any hair you could possibly think of. This kind of condition can happen to anyone at any age, though this in itself is pretty rare, as only 1 in a few million people can have it, and according to her readouts, she has had this condition since birth. The only cure to this is through hair transplant surgery. Thankfully, though, this condition is not life-threatening in any way, not to mention, according to her words, because of this condition her skin looks as smooth as that of a supermodel, and she wouldn't need to worry about getting hair care products due to this. Okay, that definitely explains why she didn't have any eyebrow hair when I got a good look at her earlier, and helmet she has was to cover her head to hide her bald dome. She probably doesn't have enough money to get the surgery herself, as I knew that a surgery like that can cost tons of money. No eyelashes even. I didn't actually notice that. Looking back, the way her eyes were almost looked like she did have eyelashes, albeit very small ones, but the fact that she actually doesn't have any was still kind of strange. A condition that doesn't let anyone ever grow hair that didn't involve any accidents or quirks or drugs. That's definitely one I've never heard of in my life. Then again, Recovery Girl was much older than us. Being a doctor as well as a hero, she would know this better than either of us. "Sounds pretty strange to me," I replied. "I agree. To have a condition like this sounds unheard of to me, as I've never encountered anyone that has a condition like this. The only time I've ever seen or met anyone having any baldness was either because of an accident, because of a particular quirk, or because of chemotherapy. For her, it's none of that, and most certainly not the second one, as it's revealed that she's completely quirkless. An 18-year-old female who has a hairless condition and is quirkless, at least that's a little bit more I can work on, but without a name I might still hit a wall in investigations." "By the way," he asked as he dragged me out of my train of thought, "have you found anything in her luggage that might point you in the right direction?" You would think that, but no. Well, sort of. You see, in her luggage we couldn't find anything regarding her identity, at least not any we could see. A little while ago, one of the men found a rectangular black case inside of the suitcase that seems can only be accessed through a digit code and a palm-reading DNA scanner. looking at the circumstances that might be where her identification might be in, but we have no way of accessing it. Believe me, we've tried to crack the code, but it didn't work. And the case has a taser as a defense mechanism if the code was put in wrong or if someone tries to force it open, unless she can unlock it for us, though obviously for now we can't until she wakes up. Everything else is just clothes, books, toiletries, and such, though we did find several notebooks in her suitcase. None of them, however, showed us a name, only just an initial, which was 𝗧𝗵𝗲, which could very well be short for her actual name. Still, despite looking through the databases, I can't find anybody that might match it. None of them match, which could mean that she might not be a resident of Japan. Though getting access to national databases is not something that an officer like myself can achieve, as databases like that can only be accessed by those who have a higher authority than us here, or if we are given permission to look into those databases by them, which we do not have. Like I said, despite what little leads we have, we're still sitting ducks here. Then it looks like we'll have no choice but to actually wait until she wakes up so we can find out ourselves. Tashinori said, in response to which I sighed as I nodded in agreement. When it comes to being a police detective, even for as long as I have been on the force, it's not always easy to manage, especially in regards to finding clues, though sometimes it's best to wait until the clues reveal themselves in time, which is what we'll have to do for now. Still, there was another thing that still bothered me. Well, two things actually, one being the cause of her condition. Somebody was trying to kill her, there was no question about it, and the fact that we don't know who it might be is rather worrying. I can only hope that whoever hurt her could be found soon before they strike again. If not for ours, then for her sake. And other thing that's been bugging me and seems both worrying and confusing at the same time is what else we found in her suitcase. There was only one other time in all my years as a nurse hero that I've ever encountered someone who had a condition such as hers, and that was about 44 years ago during one of my visits to Osaka when I was helping a young boy who was abused due to that condition. It's sad the child, no older than 14, didn't do anything wrong, yet he was being treated so horribly by both his parents and his peers, all because he was bald of all things. Disgraceful is what it is. That boy doesn't deserve that. He was a cheery and upbeat child who, despite his circumstances, always looked on the lighter side of life, even if he cried from the torment he had to endure. He has every right to. Hiding it will only be a burden on the heart and will hurt even worse with time if not given the chance to grieve in peace. His parents abandoned him around that time when they couldn't stand him anymore. They were arrested that same day, thankfully before they could flee the country, hating him not only because of his condition but because he wanted to be a hero and zoologist. With his animal shape-shifting quirk, it would be perfect for him for many reasons, with two I can name, being that he could have access to many animals he could transform into with ease, and he could help the animals on a level that most other zoologists cannot, and thankfully because his quirk, he's not rendered hairless in animal form unless he actually transforms into an animal that is hairless. But apparently his parents didn't like that, and adding his condition into the mix, abused him to make him think others and force him to give up his dreams. Were not for his only friend he had back then, he probably would have. The girl was such a sweetheart. She was always supportive of him and was there for him always since childhood. She was the reason that the boy was able to stay strong and hang on to his dream. In fact, her family took him in after he was able to leave the hospital. They were very fond of him and always saw him as part of their family, as he had always been there for their eldest, as she had been there for him, as she too was facing hardship because of her muty language quirk, as her peers saw fit to bully her for it. Her parents, who were always sympathetic and understanding, were supportive of their children's dreams and for their relationship. Not long after adopting the boy, they helped to have him transferred to their daughter's school and took action to set things right at his old school, after further investigation, by arresting 3 of the staff members who also helped in the bullying, didn't care about him, and only saw fit to make him miserable because of his condition, and promptly getting 15 students expelled from the school because of their bullying and bad behavior. Surprisingly, but thankfully, everybody else at the school had treated him with kindness and fairness, unlike those 18 individuals. Needless to say, they were all thankful to have them gone, though they would miss the boy. The principal of his old school himself, who have been unaware of this until then, promised that he will ensure that something like that will not happen again, and made sure to reinforce the rule on the ban against bullying and hired new staff members to replace the 3 that got arrested, and made sure that their backgrounds were clean and made sure that they did have a good reputation regarding how they treat children. As for the boy, who I forgot to mention his name being Hoshi, his life got a lot better after that, as he and the girl, whose name is Mi, became a young couple and stayed together through their school and college years, eventually getting married and started a family of their own. From the last time I've checked, they were happily waiting to become grandparents. I'm thankful that they managed to overcome their hardships and got the happy ending they deserved. Never did I think that I would encounter another person who had the same condition as Hoshi decades later. Still, I should have seen this coming. This girl was 4 years older than Hoshi when I met him, but thankfully, unlike him, most of her wounds are superficial. With plenty of rest, she'll regain her energy in no time. Once she wakes up, I'll be able to heal her wounds without there being a risk of accidentally knocking her out again or comatosing her. What was interesting was the helmet she had on her. By further examining it, I could see that the yellow biker helmet that had a black visor itself is made from special materials that can withstand a lot of blunt force, much more than a normal helmet could. Even being bulletproof, as there are only some very tiny dents here and there on the back of her helmet, obviously from when she was being shot at, and by the looks of it, they were fresh, meaning they were recent, and the helmet itself not only would also protect her head from harm, it also seemed to have some breathable materials in it, meaning that she could wear the helmet for hours without risking suffocating the skin around her head. Obviously, she too faced some hardships, probably worse than Hoshi, especially considering that she's quirkless, and I'm well aware of how they are being treated nowadays, which led to having a custom-made helmet for her own protection, even if she wasn't riding a bike. Looked toward the girl as she was resting on the bed, bandaged up and wearing a spare change of clothes that one of the female officers was kind enough to lend, as her own clothes would either need to be mended or would need to be thrown out, but for now was in evidence, as well as her luggage. Honestly, to me, even without a full head, she looks lovely. Her appearance almost reminds me of 𝗕𝗲𝗎. Gently rubbing her head, I couldn't help but sigh. The poor dear, abused because of being bald just like Hoshi and being quirkless unlike him. No doubt she faced worse hardship because of it. Strangely, but thankfully she had no scars on her body, unlike him, who had a good handful here and there way back then. Honestly, it irks me to no end just how cruel people can be to others less fortunate than them, or because of things that were beyond their control. If I could, I would smack the daylights out of every single idiot who dares lay harm to others because of trivial or serious matters. Sadly, having lived as long as I have, I knew all too well just how unfair life could be at times, as there were many things that were just beyond our control. No matter how much we try, there will always be things that we won't and will not be able to change either at all. Or so easily. All we can do is do what we can to help those less fortunate than us to the very best of our abilities, when the opportunity presents itself and when they are within our reach, sometimes even trying to go beyond that, whether we're heroes or just normal civilians with regular jobs. I just hope we can put the culprit behind bars soon, so this poor girl won't have to worry about being assassinated anymore. Just then, I stopped rubbing her head as I saw she started to shift in bed, as her expression changed from calm to strained. At first I thought for a second that she was going to wake up, but thought otherwise as I realized that she wasn't waking up. Rather, she was having a nightmare, as the strain on her face got worse as tears started to appear and small beads of sweat started to appear on her forehead as she turned to her right side as she curled up into a ball. No. No, please, please no. Leave them be. She muttered as the tears started to run down her face, as it looked as if she was facing something being truly horrific. Try as I might to try and soothe her so that she can go back to sleeping peacefully, it didn't work, as her struggles seemed to get worse before her voice got louder. No. No. Stop. Please. They're innocent. Stop. She pleaded desperately, as I realized I had no choice but to wake her. Seeing a child, even though she was an 18-year-old, in a state like this was heart-wrenching. Miss, wake up. I urged her as she shook her slowly. It's only a nightmare, please wake up. No. 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 She finally screamed as she shot up into a sitting position, wake and panting hard and fast, dazed as the tears continued to fall. Quickly hopping onto the bed, thankful that this room was soundproof so we wouldn't be interrupted anytime soon, I went to her right side as I gently rubbed her back in circle motions with the left while the right was on her shoulder to help ground her, as I calmly told her. 𝗓𝗧𝗵𝗲. It's okay, you're safe now. It was just a nightmare. It's going to be okay. Just breathe slowly. Can you do that for me? Soon I started the little breathing exercise with her to help her calm down. Despite being dazed, she followed until eventually she was able to breathe normally. But that didn't stop her tears, as on the contrary, after she snapped out of her daze and got a good look at herself, they got worse, as it looked like pure realization struck her hard as more tears flowed down her face like a waterfall, and she curled up, bringing her knees to her face, hugging her legs as she cried hard. This made me concerned and worried. Why was she crying? Did something horrific in her dream, or, based on her reaction after waking up, did something happen before her unintended skydive and she was reliving it? Most likely, and by the looks of it, it must be really heart-wrenching. I could do nothing but continue to comfort her and let her cry until she either wore herself out or was able to speak after she shed enough tears to be able to speak. After enough time had passed, about half an hour, she eventually stopped crying, although tears were still flowing down her face as she tried to wipe them away as she let her legs go back down. Pulling out a few handkerchiefs from my pocket, I handed them to her as she seemed to unconsciously accept them as she used one to blow her nose as it was rather runny from all the crying before setting it down gently and using the other to wipe the tears away, even though they still flowed down as she sniffled. "Are you okay, dearie?" I gently asked her. She shook her head in response. "Do you need time to calm down?" Which got a nod. I stayed by her side as I said nothing as I waited for her to calm down enough for her to speak to me, knowing that rushing her would only make things worse. Despite sniffling, she slowly breathed in and out to try to calm down and stop herself from crying again or crying even harder than she already had. After what would feel like hours, when really it's only been about 10 minutes, she was able to sigh, even if sadly, as she put down the thoroughly drenched handkerchief as she opened her eyes. While they were red from crying and there were still some visible tears around them, though thankfully there were none that were falling now, I could clearly see the color for irises. And I must say, I've never seen a shade of purple like hers. It was just as 𝗂𝗵𝗲 and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, the color of amethyst in what seemed to be its deepest but clearest form. "Can you speak now?" I asked she softly. "Why, yes. Yes, I can, sorry," she replied. Despite her accent I could tell was American, she seemed fluent in Japanese, meaning that she wasn't from Japan. She still didn't look up as her gaze was still pointed down to her lap. I understood she still needed time to process, so I proceeded carefully. "None of that, dear," I gently told her. "It's not your fault. I'm not blaming you for crying. I can only imagine what you've been through to lead you to crying for half an hour." Where? Where am I now?" she asked. "I can tell by language you speak that I must be in Japan, but I don't know where. Considering that your voice and your accent seem to be American, I can understand that. You're in Kyoto right now in the police station. You've been unconscious for about an hour and a half. I already took care of your injuries. Thankfully, the most you were suffering from was exhaustion and overexertion. The rest your wounds are just superficial." "That's good to hear." She sighed again, this time in relief. It seemed now she was able to talk without stuttering. So far so good. It seemed like she didn't have amnesia, because if she did, she was probably not remember being able to speak Japanese. Then again, even some amnesiacs would still remember how to speak other native languages depending on what type of amnesia they had. I had to make sure that she didn't have it, and as much as I would rather let her recover a little more before asking, I know as a nurse I need to ask as the protocol of a one demands it. "Dear, I hope you do not mind me asking, but it's really important. Do you remember the last thing that happened before you lost consciousness?" I asked, hoping to get a response. She was silent for a bit, obviously trying to process it and think. She soon nodded as she told me, not missing the slow flow, this time, of realization hitting her again as she spoke. "Yes. The last thing I remember was feeling extremely exhausted, as if I ran 20 consecutive marathons without rest, and felt pain from the injuries I had on me, both the ones I could see and could not, struggling trying to wake up and remember why I felt that way, as eventually I was able to open my eyes and saw the sky, confused as to why the sky seemed to be going up, not realizing that it wasn't going up but I was going down. Until eventually I looked down, awestruck by the city I saw before I realized that I was falling to my demise. I remember screaming for help even though I knew that there wouldn't be anybody who would be able to save me in time, as I was too high up and there was no way anybody would be able to catch me before I hit the ground. But then, it was then that her head shot up as her eyes widened, as the full impact of realization seemed to hit her. All Might. He saved me, as crazy as that sounds. I know what I heard, what I felt, I know what I saw. Even when I was losing consciousness, I saw him as clear as day. It really was All Might. But if it truly was him, then that means... She quickly turned to face me, startling me just slightly. If she had hair, I knew it would be swinging in the air from how fast she turned her head into my direction. Her eyes widened even more as pure shock was clear on her face. "Recovery girl?" she softly asked before I nodded slowly. She blinked her eyes for a little bit before she promptly slapped herself in the left cheek with her left hand before she pinched herself in the left arm a bit hard, flinching from both. While that was rather foolish, she probably did it just to make sure she wasn't dreaming. She blinked before she turned back to her lap as she said in a shocked voice, "This is real. It's not a dream. I'm really in the world of..." That left me confused. What did she mean by that? Before I could ask her what she was talking about or scold her for slapping and pinching herself like that in her state, she turned back to face me as a sense of urgency on her face as she then asked me, "Miss 𝗧𝗵𝗲, I know you must be confused and I know you want to scold me for slapping and pinching myself, but you have to understand I had to do that because I had to make sure I wasn't dreaming. And I need to ask you something, is All Might here?" As much as I wanted answers as well, to my surprise, ask how she knows my last name, I thought it might be best to humor her as I said, "Yes, both he and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 saw you fall while on their back from their break and caught you before you met your end. All Might just got back not too long ago from patrol and came to check on you while you were still unconscious. He's talking with his friend right now." She nodded before she turned to the side for a bit, seemed to be deep in thought before she nodded and turned back and said, which surprised me again, "I imagine they have questions they want to ask me, same for you. I'd be more than happy to explain, provided that I'm clear for interrogation and we do it in private away from prying ears." I patiently waited in the interrogation room for All Might and 𝗵𝗲𝗄 as I breathed slowly to try and keep my heart from leaping out of my chest. It was a blessing that I didn't outright freaked out or faint from meeting the 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵, aka Recovery Girl. More so when I realized that I was in the world of my favorite anime, My Hero Academia, which is one of the most popular anime in the world, while back home that is, well, the other Earth technically. As you can imagine, I am nervous and excited as all get out, and knowing I'm going to meet two of my favorite characters from the show. Believe me, I may be American, but you better believe that I am absolutely thankful that I took several different language classes, one of them being Japanese. Due to how fast of a learner I am, it was a cinch. Learning different languages and even writing them is an art in itself. Still, I need to take other things into consideration, and believe me, this is serious. 1. I don't have a clue where I am in the timeline, so I have no clue on when exactly I am. Unless I have even a hint or clue to help direct me in the right area so I may know when I am a sitting duck right now. All I can do is wait. 2. All Might and 𝗬𝗂𝐁𝐵 know each other, so I thought I must be close to the first episode of the show until I remembered what All Might looked like before I lost consciousness. He was young, healthy, his eyes were not shaded, and he was in his Bronze Age costume, and this the first time I'm seeing him wear it outside of only seeing a glimpse of it from the first movie, meaning that he has not gotten either his Silver nor Gold Age costumes yet, which means that he hasn't gotten that life-threatening injury yet. The fact that he and 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐁 know each other early on means that there might be some things that will be different from the canon universe, but is this the only change, or will there be other changes that will happen here that didn't happen in the show? I don't know for certain, and this frightens me. 3. I have knowledge on this universe, meaning that whatever happens is on my head, whether I'll let things happen as they did in the canon, or if I should intervene. I know that I'll need to be careful in what I do, when I do it and what I say, or I'll risk ending this world. Worst case scenario. No pressure or anything, sarcastically, though one thing is for sure, I've got a big responsible on my hands. 4. I will need to be careful so I won't risk getting killed, and I don't just mean by the villains. If he finds out about me and gets his hands on me, well, I don't want to find out what he'll do. ****. 5. I don't have a record of existence in this world that will need to be remedied, but I don't know how, which is a problem. Without a record, I'm in trouble. I don't even want to imagine myself being somebody's lab rat due to suspicion of being an alien. No thanks. It's not the only thing that is on my mind. While I'm grateful for the fact that I'll never see those 3 monsters again, especially after what they've done, while I'm thankful to be alive, I know that. Before I could finish my thoughts, I was knocked back into reality at the sound of a door opening as my gaze turned to it, only to see All Might, Toshinori Yagi, and 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐁 come in, greeting me with warm, welcoming smiles, indeed as I needed that. They looked just like they did in the anime. 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐁, I think, looks like he's only about 2 years older than me. He may look plain to everyone else, but to me he looked just fine. He's genuinely cute. He's even wearing the same police uniform that he wore in the anime. He's a great friend to count on, I know that for certain. One of the best police detectives on the force, not only because of his lie detector quirk, but because of his determination and hard work, rhyme not intended. And All Might himself. I'm thankful I have years' worth of acting under my belt because I know I'd be blushing as red as a scarlet ruby by now, though my heart beating fast wasn't a thing I could stop. He was just as handsome as, maybe more so than, he was in the show. I could see his eyes are just as expressive as the fanfiction stories I've read depicted it. I could sense a calming, reassuring vibe coming off of him which helped me to stay relaxed. With a Herculean, well-chiseled body like his, he could put every bodybuilder in the world to shame. But I know his heart was the key to his character. He was kind, caring and good, determined to fight for what's right even if it cost him his life. He was very selfless, even sometimes to a fault. But his heart was always where it needed to be, even if he might be a little reckless. He's a lovable dork. I've always admired him since I first saw him. And no, I do not have feeling towards him. Sure, maybe a schoolgirl crush, but that's it. I'm not in love with him. Besides, I've already lost him. My fi. I smiled back at them and waved as I skillfully hid my sorrow. Though for a second I thought I saw All Might frown slightly as if he knew I was hiding something, though it vanished quickly as his smile appeared again. Was I just seeing things? Something in my gut told me no. I know, call it paranoia, but whenever my gut tells me something is up, it is never wrong. Hello, miss. The hero started as he and the living lie detector, who held the jet black sleek security box my dear friends made for me years back, took their seats across from me as the box, or case because of the way it is shaped, was placed on the table. We're glad to see that you are all right. You gave us a fright earlier. To see you well and healthy again is a relief. I imagine so. I replied politely. I'm just grateful to be alive, and not handicapped in any way. And so are we. Thankfully, extreme exhaustion and exertion don't leave any scars and superficial wounds are easy to heal. 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐴 agreed with a chuckle. Yup, I said with a nod. I knew what they were going to ask me. I've seen this kind of scene hundreds of times. I know what was to come. Though I'm thankful that they were trying to lighten the mood a bit. I'm aware that there were things that needed to be done, and whether I feel ready or still feel more than hesitant, I'm willing to proceed forward with it. Now I know that you have questions, and I'm more than willing to explain. But first I must ask, are we completely alone? Some of the things I'm going to tell you, that's not involved in my case, is something that should not to hurt by prying ears. I'd rather not have havoc arise because of it. I explained in a concerned but serious matter. We double-checked to make sure that no one will spy on us, and this room is soundproof so no one will hear anything that will be said in here. If there's sensitive information that you don't want anyone to hear, then I can assure you that that won't happen unless you decide to give permission to allow it. 𝗵𝗲𝗄𝐴 reassured me. I knew he was telling the truth. His eyes and his voice told me, not that I was doubting him, as I signed softly with a nod as he then pulled out a clipboard which he had hidden until now. Time for an introduction. Before I tell you my story, obviously I'm aware that you need my name and everything, and considering that nobody has been able to hack into my security box, I assume also that you're already looking to the database trying to find the information about me, only to find none. You guys don't know who I am. To start off, my name is Mylove Nozomi Sanyu. I saw their reaction coming as they both blinked at the name I told them. No, really, that is my name. My first name in the category of names you probably have never heard of or don't really encounter too often. Not to mention my full name is a sentence, not adding the second Sanyu into it. Mylove literally means my love in English. Nozomi quite obviously means hope in Japanese, and as for Sanyu it means happiness in Italian and Ugandan. So altogether it means my love for hope and happiness, or hope and happiness are my love. I explained, and in case you are wondering why I have two Sanyus in my name, it's so that if I ever get married then I can still keep Sanyu in my name. I'm very used to people giving me either a baffled, confused, intrigued, fascinated, or odd look, knowing how odd it sounded. And I'm by no means offended as I'm very well aware of how odd my name sounds to everybody else and how unique it is. For these two, it was a mix of the last three I mentioned. I've encountered my fair share of people who have odd or intriguing names that are very different from most that I have heard, so I'm no stranger to it. Turning to Tsukachi, he nodded to him, telling him that I was telling the truth, not like I was ever going to lie to them. 1. I'm a bad liar unless I'm acting in a play, and 2. Trying to get past him was not gonna fly. You try lying to someone who has the power to know if you're lying or not. Besides, I have no intention of hiding anything from them. I need all the help I could get. They're the only people I can turn to here, though that does not mean that I won't be careful. Turning back to me, All Might gestures for me to continue, and I did. I'm 18 years old, a prodigy student who graduated from Harvard College in Cambridge, Massachusetts just hours ago today. To hear that surprised them, no doubt, as that was located in the United States of America. To be suddenly transported here from there was huge, but it's even huger than that, as they will soon learn. And hearing that I only graduated today at 18? Well, how would you react? It's rare for someone to graduate from a school at a much younger age, but it could still happen to anyone. As you can guess, I continued, I'm from American. My place of birth was in a small but otherwise prosperous village in Vermont, which is located in the far north corner of it, called Harmonious Village. Then when I was 5 and my parents moved to Kingston for better opportunities in regards of funds and schooling. I'm an only child. And you have probably already been told by 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏 recovery girl, I was born with a condition that prevents me from growing any hair, and the only remedy for it is hair transplant surgery, but I refuse to get it because 1, it is expensive, and 2, is a personal reason which I will explain later. My blood type, if you haven't already been told of it yet, is gold blood, which is an extremely rare blood type that only 1 in a few million people have. I have aspirations of becoming a multi-artisan, which means a person who is an artist on multiple different levels outside of the arts, anything that can be artistic in a way, and sharing my gifts and inspiration with others. He nodded as he wrote it all down, a bit surprised that I answered questions he was going to ask before he could ask them, but continued to write. Any information you need more about me, I am happy to give to you in this case, if you will allow me permission to open it. Startled by my forwardness here, but otherwise happy about my cooperation, he nodded and pushed the case towards me as I immediately began to punch in the DG code before placing my hand on the scanner. I'm not going to tell you guys what it is, privacy. The case opened as I pulled out my records, state, medical, dental, school in that order, state license, passport, and my diploma that I received from college graduation, and handed them to him as he accepted them before I pulled out something that had nothing to do with my records. It was a kinda large but adjustable black cocker with a big, seemingly realistic bucket in the center of it. Looking at it brought back the memories of my best friends, who I will never see again. As I held it close to my chest as I closed my eyes, trying absolutely hard to not let any of my tears show, as my eyes managed to stop any tears from showing that they were welling up in them, as I signed softly to try and hide the sorrow in it, though I think, as I opened to my eyes, all might heard it but chose not to say, and instead asked as he pointed to the item in my hands, "What's that?" I then showed it to him as I explained, "It's my cocker. Normally I'm never without it, as I'm always wearing it. However, there are certain times I leave it off, like if I was going to sleep or taking a bath, or if a certain event comes up that requires me to not wear any accessories to ensure nothing gets lost or snagged." It was a gift I received when I was 6 from 2 people who were my bestest friends in the whole world. We were as close as sisters in that regard. He nodded, smiling softly, though I can see it in his eyes that he was concerned when I kept using the past tense. I knew either he or 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 were going to ask eventually. What they would ask, you may wonder, besides the obvious. There are questions that I have no doubt that I will be asked, especially as All Might had a thoughtful expression on his face, as it looked like he was thinking about something before he turned back to me as I proceeded to put the choker back on my neck where it belonged. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there's something that's bugging you and you want to ask me something. I stated, more than asked, as he nodded. I've lived in America for several years before moving back to Japan back in my college days. I've even traveled from the state to state, sometimes with my best friend. I've even been to Vermont at least once. As far as my memory serves, I've never heard of Harmonious Village. Why is that? Well, there are 2 reasons behind it. The first reason I will explain soon, but the second is because I soon found myself becoming sad as I tried not to let myself become too sorrowful, though I fear it's in vain, as I fear that my eyes betray me. It doesn't exist anymore. All Might was stunned as his shoulders straightened up at my response. The same with 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏, as, upon hearing that, he looked up from the records he was looking at as they both looked at me. Why is that? The number 1 hero asked me. I said nothing at first, bringing up something that happened not even a day ago. After taking some time to calm myself after letting myself break down while in recovery girls' care earlier, it will not ever be easy. I knew I had to them. But first I had to start with basically everything, like where I come from and everything that happened to me up until now. Well, I started a bit hesitantly. First, I need to make a few things clear to you guys. As crazy as this sounds, you got to hear me out. Does this have anything to do with your case? 𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 asked. Well, yes and no, for many reasons. But I'll tell you guys why. I started. Here goes nothing. I thought before I said, it's because I am not from this world but from another that's very different from this one. I'm from a world where nobody has any special powers. Essentially everybody there is quirkless. Also where I come from, this world that you guys live in is a part of an anime that is very popular back home. There was silence as anticipated. Neither said a word at this. All Might blinked as he stared at me as if I grew second head. Disbelief visible. He was nudged by 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as the blonde hero turned to him, who was just as in disbelief as he was. But unlike him, his was a mix of disbelief and shock, slowly nodding his head telling him that it's true, which shocked the blonde hero more before they turned back to me as I nodded to them both and continue. For a helpful comparison, think back to the time before 𝐒𝐭𝐴 manifested. Heroes were regular people doing their jobs like policemen and firemen and such, While the concept of heroes with superpowers only reside in fiction like comic books and mangas and movies and TV shows and games and such. And I also have information on the future, but don't ask me, there's much I can't reveal, at least not now, as I fear that if I reveal anything too soon then I might cause something bad to happen in the timeline of this world. But there are things I can tell you right now, if it'll help further proof that I am speaking the truth. Not that I doubt you and your lie detector quirk, Mr. 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He straightened up when I said, I was wondering when you were going to eventually ask me. But yes, I do know who you are. Your name is Naomasa 𝗧𝗵𝗲. Your quirk is lie detector, which allows you to instantly detect whether somebody's lying to you. It is much more accurate than your sister Makoto's polygraph quirk, which can accidentally mistaken somebody as lying or being honest sometimes if she's not careful. I also know that she tends to give you a hard time at times. His eyes widened at that, shocked, on the verge of having his jaw drop to the floor. As was All Might. The two quickly looked at each other before looking back at me several times. No doubt thinking she knows about that? I don't blame their reaction. Anyone would react at that. That was when All Might asked me in serious but urgent tone, do you know who I am? I calmly nodded as I replied, yes, your real name is Toshinori Yagi, while your hero name is All Might. You were once quirkless until you met Nana Shimura, who trained you. You could inherit the quirk that's been passed down from generation to generation in the hopes of taking down All for One, a quirk given by a DNA sample and by the current user's willing consent, one for all. After your master, who sacrificed her life in order to save you and her dearest friend, was killed by that immortal monster, Gran Torino, also known as Sorahiko Torino, took over your training during your final year in UA, and he was so brutal that you're still pretty scared of him today. Under his order, in order to get stronger, you fled to America to make a name for yourself and train until you were ready to face that monster again. If you didn't, then he would have found and killed you for sure. Nana was like a mother to you, and she meant so much to you that her death ripped your heart in half, as did mine. During your time in America, you met a man named David Shield who you saved from getting killed in a fire, and he became one of your best friends and partner ever since. He's responsible for making the current costume that you're wearing and the first one you had in America. That was a lot to dump on one person, but he asked for it. He wanted to know. I don't blame him. If the roles were reversed, I would feel the same way. Deeply shocked, serious, and urgent. Maybe mad, depending on the person. I then told them both, after seeing them even more shocked than ever, as I made sure my expression was serious but firm, I promise you both that I'm absolutely not going to share this information with any villain, knowing that if any one of your enemies ever got their hands on the information that I have on me, then this would lead to a ginormous metric load of trouble and chaos. The info I have, I want to use it to help people, but I'm aware that if I make too many changes in the timeline, then this can lead to results beyond even my comprehension. Intervening when necessary is advisable for me. There will even be events I cannot intervene in for serious but different reasons. Now, just so you know, there are bits of information I do not remember or know of and a couple of things that goes on in this world. There's only so much I can recall. But I'll do what I can to help if it means that I can help prevent certain disasters from happening that could affect the future in a big way. It's a big responsibility, I'm aware, but someone's gotta uphold it. More silence fell, though the two men by a small margin were able to calm themselves as they took the time to think about everything I just told them. This was a lot to process, yes, and I know the information I have is double-edged sword. Just as it can be beneficial to help others, it can also be used against us should it fall into the wrong hands. Too much information could be a terrible thing, but then again, so can too little information. A bit of a two-way street. If used correctly and at the right time, it would lead to good results, but if told at the wrong time and told to the wrong person, Well, you get the picture. After a while, 𝗧𝗵𝗲, after nodding to All Might who nodded back, sighed as he asked me, "How do you know about all of this?" "That's easy," I told him with a reassuring smile. "Like I said, where I come from, your world is a part of an anime show which is one of the most popular back there, better known as My Hero Academia. I've been a fan of the show for several years. In fact, I'm actually a fan of you both." To my relief, All Might chuckled at this. "Really now?" he asked. "Yup," I replied. "Both of you are very admirable to me. There are other characters I'm also a fan of, although there are some I can't reveal without knowing where I am in the timeline." He nodded in understanding. Soon 𝗧𝗵𝗲, now after a few calming breaths, asked me, "How much do you know?" "More than enough to make a man question everything he ever knew. Either that or lose their sanity," I told him, before sternly saying, "I have no intention of telling what I know to anybody who have anything but good intentions. In fact, I would rather throw myself into a shark tank and fight sharks for survival than tell any villain anything I know." They were spooked by that. "No, really, I am quite serious about that. It's a huge responsibility after all. It's not something that can be taken lightly." After the detective nodded to his friend, the lie detector told me, "That's a bit extreme." "I'm aware, but if it means that I can keep the information away from then villains and bad people, then I'll do it," I replied. That was when All Might gave me a smile, genuine, gentle but warm, as he then said, "While I'd rather you not do something like that, especially given your quicklessness, I can see that you're willing to do anything to protect others, even if it may cost you your life. You're loyal to those you trust, and you don't want to lose that trust, am I right?" I smiled back as I told him, "Yup, sometimes I'm kind of loyal to a fault, but there are benefits that come from it. I don't want to give anyone I love any reason to not trust me." The #1 hero chuckled as he agreed, saying, "Indeed, yes. I guess we're similar in that regard." "Yeah," I agreed. Then 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smiled finally, as he said, "At least we know you're not gonna sing like a canary to any predator you meet." "Yes, I give you my word on that," I told him as he nodded. "Good. I'm relieved that the both of them know that I'm not going to squeal, and that they can trust me. I'm relieved to see them both smiling. But I know that I was just trying to avoid the inevitable. I know I have to tell them sooner rather than later about what happened to me and what happened to lead up to it. It hurts. It still does. I can only hope that I won't fall apart before I finish, but it needs to be done." I signed softly, exhausted though not physically, as my smile dropped, as the others, upon seeing this, soon followed as I told them, "Now I know that you guys want to know what happened to me to lead to nearly falling to my death. But in order for me to get to that, I need to explain how everything that accumulated which lead up to events that I was forced to endure. I need to start at the beginning. It will take a while, but by telling you the whole story entirely, it'll help you to understand certain things that happened which led up to the events of not even a day ago. But I need you two to not interrupt me, as I don't want to repeat myself, and what I will tell you will be hurtful to me, as I'm basically going to be reliving my memories. It hurts, but I can't just avoid this forever, even if the wounds are fresh. I'm not forcing myself even if I'm hesitant, but it can't be bottled up forever. Once I start, there's no going back. Are you two ready?" They thought about it before the two looked to the other and nodded and turned back to me as they replied, "Yes." This was it. There's no turning back now. I took a deep breath before I exhaled to calm myself. "Very well," I said to them as I told them my story of how I lost everything all because of circumstances beyond my control. And my story begins a long time ago, back to the time when I was still very young. For as long as I can remember back then, times were much more happier. I grew up in a village known as Harmonious Village, in Vermont. While this village was not too well known, it was still a paradise for anybody who were going through very difficult times in different ways than what you expect. This village was founded about 60 years ago, and the mayor of the village is a descendant of the first mayor of the village, as the role has been passed down from generation to generation in his bloodline. This village was to be made a home for anybody who was seen as odd or strange, or had particular early weird talents, or was even outcast by society or by their own families due to circumstances beyond their control, especially if they weren't at fault. Through a secret channel through the homeless people, we could send the message out to anybody who are going through difficult times because of those circumstances, and could recommend those people to travel there to find the peace and happiness that they were robbed of. Essentially starting a brand new life. Despite it being small, it was still very prosperous with its vegetable farms and fruit trees. due to the soils being so rich and so refined from natural causes that planting any kind of plant, especially food products like veggies and fruit, is very possible, sometimes even faster than how plants normally grew depending on the particular thing you plant in the soil. Obviously, the village is very frugal, though we do get other products shipped from other places around the world like dairy or drinks or fabrics to sew or tools to use or other things. Though a little off the beaten path, we had a river which we get water from which is very pure with hardly any impurities in it, so that should there ever be a drought we would still have fresh drinking water. We do have modern-day things like telephones and plumbing and electricity and such, so believe me, we're not back in the Stone Age there. Though you could say we're sort of old style mixed with modern day. Everyone cares for one another, and we all share and help each other out however we can, even for the smallest and menial tasks. We had lots of people from basically everywhere from America to even Japan, or even cold places like the Arctic and such. We all treat each other like family and do what we can to be there for one another, especially when they're still recovering from the hardships that each and every one of them face. Yes, we eventually had some people leave after a long recovery or who are looking for better opportunities as our village didn't have the particular resources that they needed, but we can always count on them coming back to return home for a visit or so. Some even bring their families, introduce and show them the experiences that not many people get to have. We also have some strict rules like under no circumstances is anyone to mistreat anyone for the same reasons that everybody else treated them for. Those who do would face community service. Anything worse, or if it still continues to go on without rest, would mean jail time. If it's more severe like say murder, then they would be sent to prison in another city and promptly be banished from ever coming back there. Thankful that hardly ever happens, and those situations normally gets dealt with quite rapidly thanks some of our experts having been, well, experts in dealing with those cases, especially if some are policemen. That's where I was born. I love the village quite immensely and love every part of it and everyone who lived in there. My mother Abrielle was born there, and my father Gerald was born in California, and during his trip to Vermont he met my mother in the village. He too had the same beliefs as my mother and everyone else in the village, so he was easily welcomed in with open arms. They got to know each other and eventually started dating, though sadly had to cut things short when his trip was coming to an end. However, about 2 months later, he returned with the decision to move there so that he could be with her. He never knew his mother as she died during childbirth, and his father died sometime before that, and he inherited enough money to be able to move to be with her. You can already guess what took place after. They dated for years until they eventually got married and had me. From what I've been told, the name I was given was very unique, and my parents wanted me to have a name that was not only beautiful but one so unique that nobody else had a name like mine. Mylove Nozomi Sanyu. The two Sanyus being so that if I married then I could still keep it in my name. My love for hope and happiness is how it was translated. Everybody in our village agreed that the name suited me perfectly, especially as I got older. I really divined the name that I had, as I always tried to look on the positive side of things and try to make everybody else happy if someone was sad or hurting, doing what I could to help. Growing up, I learned a lot about many things from many of the people who lived there, even learning how to do certain things that they could do. As it turned out, I was a prodigy in fast learning, so I could learn things more rapidly than other people could. Even more so than other fast learners. This also meant that I never forgot things even when I was a child. For years, my parents grew concerned about me, due to not having any hair whatsoever, even after being well past infancy, as sometimes some babies are born bald or have only tiny hairs at birth. But I never had any concern about it, as I never thought it was odd, as I was not the only person who was bald there, most of which being men and some being women due to accidents or incidences that they faced in the past. I was taken to the doctor when I was 4, and he found out that I had the very rare condition of being born completely and utterly bald. Simply put, I would never be able to grow any hair ever. Though there is a cure for it, the problem is that hair transplant surgery is crazy expensive, so any chance of getting the surgery are very slim to none. But back then I told my parents that I didn't need surgery to have hair. Hair doesn't bring happiness, and it shouldn't matter if I was never going to grow hair or not. Yes, despite being an adolescent, I understood things much more readily than others do at my age back then, and thanks to the lessons that the people of the village taught me, I was wiser beyond my years. Stunned by my words but otherwise overwhelmed, my parents took me into my arms and cried as they were proud of me for being so mature and agreed that I was right. Hair didn't equal happiness, and agreed to never force it on me despite their worries. Everyone accepted this oddity, as I was not the first to have a condition similar to mine or something different but otherwise rare like mine. Though strangely around where my eyebrow hair should be was so pronounced you can see where the brows are even if there's no hair. The doctors attribute that to natural genetics from the past relative, though who was never specified. Eventually, sometime after that, it became very clear that my knowledge was well above my peers, and sadly our village didn't have a middle school or high school as my knowledge was above normal. Honestly, the lessons I was given wasn't challenging enough. My parents wanted me to have the best education I could get, and while the option of homeschooling was available, my parents wanted me to get real schooling in as neither of them wanted me to be isolated from everybody despite the fact that our whole village is very friendly and social. Also around this time my parents, while they did a great job at what they did, they always dreamed of doing more elsewhere where opportunities were more presented than they were in our village admittingly. So with that in mind, and with the opportunity to achieve that with the transfer from work, with a heavy heart around the age of 5 my family and I moved to a city far from our village to start a new life, promising to one day come back to visit. We moved to Kingston, and for a time everything seemed to be fine. The elementary school I went to was thankfully more prosperous in regards of more challenging things than the elementary school I went to in Harmonious village had, though sadly only my teachers never treat me bad. My peers on the other hand always saw me as a freak due to my baldness. They would just stare at me, some of which didn't even want to get near me believing that I would infect them with baldness. And those who do usually call me mean names. Thankfully they got stopped by the teachers every time, though they still continued on if they believed that they could get away with it. Some even threw things at me if they thought they could get away with it, but it was never stealthy enough as they would always get caught red-handed before being put in timeout. Though this led me to bring a helmet to school to protect my head, as the last few times that I had things thrown at my head they were hard and some of them could have potentially hurt me or worse. Even if they didn't do better, it should have been clear in their heads that those items could have got them in very big trouble if they did more harm than what had happened initially. Being a responsible student, I always told the teacher on them every time whenever they picked on me or another classmate, which made me even more of an outcast as some proceeded to call me tattletale and didn't even want to be friends with me due to thinking that I would rat them out. While that made me sad, I worked diligently to not show it, as some of the people from my village told me that showing a reaction to bullies or abusers would only fan the flames and make things worse, and even taught me that I should never be friends with somebody who abuses anyone for any reason. If they never see reason, then that is their problem, not mine, though what I can do is tell someone I can trust like a teacher or my parents, or even the police if necessary, to help solve the problem. Then things started to get really weird at home by the time half a year passed since our move to Kingston. I'm not sure when it started precisely, but one day I started to notice some odd things about my parents. It started out small, with them hardly ever smiling at me anymore. Though they try, I can always tell it wasn't always real, thanks to some of my past friends at the village being in actors and teaching me how to act and even detect things that were genuine or not. Their smiles were hardly ever genuine. I didn't understand why. But then I saw some of the bills that my father was dealing with, so I figured that work was getting really difficult for them, hence why they were smiling less and trying to focus on getting work done to provide for our house and family. They barely hugged me either, but I also attribute that to work, as I've heard that sometimes stressful heavy work can make one less energetic and less responsive to things like that. Sometimes it also led to parents not being able to spend more time with their children and feeling like they couldn't do much for them due to how busy they were. Despite being young, I wanted to do what I can to help my parents. I want to show that I was able to take care of myself and help make things less strenuous on them. So I asked one of our old neighbors how I can do to help my parents, said neighbor Geraldine, who was a blind, old but kind lady well into her 80s, was able to give me some helpful tips on how I can help my parents, helping with chores around the house, doing odd jobs around the neighborhood to earn money, and learning early on how to manage it as it would serve me well in the future. Study to get good grades so I can advance in my studies and even apply to another school once I was done with elementary and so on. Looking to gain a scholarship, especially for when I get into high school, so that I'd be set for college, but also have money saved up just in case things go south, stuff like that. That all may seem like it's too much for a child at the age of 5 going on 6 years old, but my neighbor Leona, as she preferably calls herself, knew that I was different from most children. And once upon a time, she was a prodigy like me. She could still do much despite having lost her sight when she was 65 in an accident. She wanted to see, metaphorically speaking, me blossom, so she was more than happy to be of assistance if I needed help on anything if my parents were too busy to be of assistance to me. So I did some chores around the house like sweeping, dishes, helping keeping the living room organized, even making sure to keep my room tidy, though I wouldn't be able to get into more stronger cleaning products until I got older, but that's to be expected, which got a nod and approval from them before going back to work. Sure, I didn't get to do those chores all the time as my parents would take care of it if I was the occupied or something. I even made my own lunches so we would not have to pay for school lunches. Nothing too over the top. Just like simple lunches like leftovers from the other day, specifically sandwiches or some fruit, cookies, and water, as we were almost never low on those as they were pretty cheap to get. When it came to doing odd jobs around the neighborhood, like watering the plants, sweeping the porch and the driveway, helping bring groceries into their houses, and even help entertain their pets if they needed to be preoccupied while they were busy doing something. To name a few. I never had a pet as my parents never got one, and I wasn't sure if I should ask as they seemed to be busy and I didn't want a pet to be too bothersome to them. So when I entertained pets for my neighbors, it was enough to satisfy me, especially when I got to learning how to care for pets and animals. When it came for scholarships, that was definitely something to be explored, especially for somebody like me. My neighbor helped me pick out the best ones that seemed to interest me the most, and even pick more than one as it didn't hurt to have more than one kind of scholarship. I eventually settled into getting, or at least trying to get, a scholarship in art, drama, soccer, track, gymnastics, ping pong, literature, choir, math, and or dance. More because that many were an art in itself, besides the first one being very literally art. It might seem like it's going overboard, but I was a go-getter, and I always dived into challenges headfirst, especially when it came to my love of learning and my quick learning ability. When it came to choir and math, Leona had me covered as she would tutor me, quickly finding that I loved to sing. But when it came to other things, I knew I needed more help, so I thought who better to ask than my teachers in elementary school. They were stunned by what I asked of them, but they were otherwise proud to see a young adolescent wanting to bloom and advance. Especially as I was one of their brightest and responsible pupils they've had, they were more than happy to help me when I had free time, which was most of the time, as I always got my schoolwork done fast, even doing it after I finished my initial class assignment so I wouldn't have to worry about it later. Whenever it was a free period or if I finished my work, their aides would help take over the class while the teacher themselves would escort me to a private room to start tutoring me on what I needed to know to get the scholarships I'm looking to get. For some reason, much to all of our surprise but otherwise glee, I took to each lesson like a duck in water. They came so easy that it looked like I could do them in my sleep. Not to brag really, but just feels like it. We knew I was rather prodigal, but the way I took the lessons like a champ really said something. Such blessings like that was something to be thankful for, which I always was, as I always thank my teachers for their assistance. However, it only placed the bigger target on my back, as this did not go unnoticed as teachers more often, and not had to defend me from them, who called me a teacher's pet or even try to antagonize me for being a favorite student. Despite being a social butterfly, I had no friends in school around my age, though I would try hard to not let it bother me, especially when the teacher sometimes brought in another student who was a prodigy like me in one or two of my classes but had some kind of handicap like deafness or being unable to talk or something like that. They try to never let it bother them. I got to know those kids and we became good friends. Even took the chance to learn how to communicate in different languages, like sign language, which would be beneficial for my future. Though sadly they wouldn't stay long, as eventually their parents would move them to another school for special needs, but we would still mail each other when we had a chance, so we were able to stay in contact, so things were less lonely still for me. Meanwhile at home, a week after starting my lessons, I eventually told my parents about what I've been doing. For first time in a while, they actually showed surprise, but soon after smiled more genuinely and nodded. Well, my mom more than my dad, but that was more than enough for me. As long as I could make them proud and happy, as long as I can earn their approval, then all would be all right. Right. How naive was I to believe that? Little did I know that there were more things going on than I believed when it came to my parents. Had I only known way back then maybe things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. That day was all but a short-lived dream. As the days progressed, they still rarely ever smiled, and I only ever got approving nods from them. But again, I naively believed that it was because of work. My mother working as an architect while my father was a plumber and mechanic, so I'm aware of how stressful and difficult those jobs can be. Despite this, things were fine up until their wedding anniversary. I wanted to get something really nice for my parents with the money that I've earned, though I knew getting something super fancy was going to be out of the question, as I knew I would not have enough money to get something really fancy. Even with the allowance that I get and the money that I've earned from the odd jobs I did, I knew that I would only have enough to get something that wasn't super extravagant, but hopefully would be enough to bring smiles on their faces. So like any hopeful customer hoping to find something nice and at a much more affordable, cheaper price, I went to Goodwill. It was there then I found a very valuable treasure of sorts there. It was a big, complete, untouched and unopened kitchen set. It looked elegant looking and pristine. I knew that the dishes we had at home were getting worn out, and some even had some cracks and chips in them and would very much need to be replaced, though getting a complete overhaul of our dishware was going to be difficult. However, upon seeing the set was essentially combined with tax be $30, which is exactly what I had in my wallet, I leapt at the first chance to get it. To my surprise that day, they were also having a sale, so the price was cut of half, which meant I would have $15 left in my wallet, which was a bonus. With the rather large wagon I brought the set all the way back home with a card that I bought at the dollar store for their anniversary. At the same time I had gone home, my parents had returned from work, only to see what I had in the wagon as I presented it to them. I even told them that they could be the first to break in, not literally the new dishware themselves, as I would be fine with just having apples with peanut butter for dinner. While Mom was stunned but smiled a little more soon after, Dad only nodded. It was enough though, not realizing that neither of them had thanked me. More on that later. That night I spied on them as they were having their anniversary dinner with big smiles and laughter, using the new dishes that I got them, which brought joy to me as this was first time in so long since I've seen them like that. However, after all laughter and jokes, eventually their conversation delved into something else as I listened in. It was so thoughtful of her to get this set for us. I honestly completely forgot all about it, wanting to get a set to replace the one we had. Also, having the chores dealt with sometimes, it's a bit of a relief for us. The fact that she's even working to try to get a scholarship so going to college will be affordable and hopefully take some weight off our shoulders is pretty shocking, but at least we won't have to worry too much about fundings there. Mom had said, as long as she doesn't cause ruckus, it's alright. Dad simply said, almost like he really didn't want to talk right now. I doubt she will, or ever for that matter. She hasn't done anything to raise red flags. Mom assured him. Tell our neighbors and the brat's parents that if it'll get them to shut up, he said with frustration, which surprised me. For as long as I can remember, I didn't recall Dad ever being frustrated or even speaking like that, though then again he may have hidden it, so hence why I never saw before or even heard. And I may have been naive, but I was anything but delusional to what was going on in regards to our neighbors, as I was well aware that handful of our neighbors weren't approachable to me due to me being bald, some of which even mistaking me as a boy despite obviously wearing dresses. Some still talked behind my back if they thought I didn't hear them, as I would sometimes hear them call me a bald freak, ugly bald rat, hairless monkey, to name a few. While that hurt, I never showed it, as I didn't want them to be alerted that I heard them, or give them any reason to feel more provoked than they unnecessarily were. And not for the first time, parents of my classmates would complain to my parents about my baldness and accuse me of things I didn't do whenever their child got in trouble, though they would always be proven wrong thanks to teachers showing evidence. Some of those parents wanted me to be expelled, though they were always detained by security when they got way out of hand, often being told off for blowing things way out of proportion. Some even had the absolute audacity to want to make a rule to ban bald people from attending school, which was severely outrageous, as I was not the first person to be bald in the school system, which earned them a bigger scolding for thinking such a thing, and would be recommended to see a psychiatrist for their questionable behavior, which they always made a fuss over, though the staff would not hear any of it, even making their own threats that they would call the authorities if they didn't leave. The subject alone. Maybe they're starting to get on his nerves? I thought to myself upon thinking that it would make perfect sense, as even those who were well-mannered and good-hearted had limits depending on the case. Then the conversation continued. Well, one day they'll see just how wrong they were. I'm sure that Mylove will prove it. Mom said hopefully. Or unless we do something to make them stop sooner. Dad scoffed. How so? She asked him. But he didn't say anything as he waved it off, his way of saying he didn't feel like talking about it. The rest of dinner went by quietly, and I thought it would be wise to go bed, not knowing it would circle around again one day in the future. When I was 6, my school had gotten some new transfer students coming in just a month after the school year started. As it turned out, to my surprise but hopeful glee, they were 2 girls right around my age who too were prodigies, much like me though in different fields. They even sat in the same row as me. Thankfully they were very social, though they themselves didn't have any friends besides each other, much like me, except I didn't really have anybody except my teachers. We immediately hit it off from that first day, and we became very close almost instantaneously, like it was meant to be. 3 lonely 6-year-olds who had lots of potential. Neither cared that I was bald, because they themselves had an oddity themselves that made they stand out like me, and had been taught very well by their folks to never treat others badly for things that were out of their control or strange or trivial or even stupid, as that was a waste of time. was absolutely shallow and would always lead to severe consequences in the future. That day was one of the happiest days of my life. I finally had friends of my own, around my age, and even understood me in ways that would make it seem like we were triplets in that regard. To give you a description of what they look like and what odd treat they had that made him stand out. First is 𝗵𝗃, who was part Chinese and part Japanese, had somewhat tan skin, golden brown short hair done in 2 low pigtails, wore black shirt under a dark brown coat, black squirts, white knee-length socks, and bright pink and white running shoes, and a pair of adjustable black fingerless gloves she was never seen without. Her oddity was her eyes, as they were absolutely unlike anybody else's in the world from the last anyone checked. Her right eye was auburn leaning more towards red, and the left was so dark brown it was almost completely black unless you shine a light on it. Despite, in our world, having either of those eye colors would cause some problems in the eyes, but for some reason or another she never had any, which was something to be grateful for. She was very bluntly honest but kind and generous. She was super smart, as out of the 3 of us, she was the brains, as she knew not only math but science, medicine, chemistry, and biology too. She came from a family of scientists, and she was a bigger prodigy than her parents, who, despite being very famous, always took the time to spend with their daughter and help teach her things she needed to know. 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗲 Konani, on the other hand, who was a mix of Hawaiian, Japanese, Swahili, and Russian, had dark brown skin, bright light gray eyes, long black hair she always wore in a think braid. She wore a bright crystal blue turtleneck sleeveless shirt, white knee-length shorts, white short socks, a pair of crystal blue, regular blue and white Velcro strap shoes, and a well-made and durable ruby red diamond embezzled barrette, which was passed down to her from generation to generation, going back to her great-great-grandmother, that she hardly ever took off. Her oddity was that her skin, as it was much more darker than most black people, though that only made her eye color stand out and shine even more. Her skin had always been darker than normal since birth. There was no tanning involved. She was thrill-seeker and tended to be easily frustrated and clumsy, but down to a core was very cheerful, thoughtful, caring, and loyal. She was the more sportier figure of us, as she very good at a lot of spots like basketball, baseball, soccer, to name a few, track just like me, as we were competitive friendly rivals there, and as well she knew a lot of forms of hand-to-hand combat and martial arts, and even knew lacrosse. She kind of had a legacy of her own, as her family, tracing back to her great-great-uncle, were well-known sportsmen, kind of passing it down to either their niece or nephew instead of to their own children, as their own usually had other aspirations they wanted to follow, which they supported. It was thanks to 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗲 that all of us managed to get through any subjects regarding science and biology, and such thanks to her stellar tutoring. And when it came to staying in shape, 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗵𝗲 was a pro in ensuring that we were in good health and shape, as despite her clumsy recklessness, she was not stupid to treat her body badly to achieve anything in sports. It especially helped our brainiac friend who fell behind in sports sometimes. We even had all the same classes together, which was a bonus. From that day on, my lonely days in school were finally over, and I spent any chance I got with my friends, whether it was having fun or studying or just plain goofing off. We were practically joined to the hip and sometimes even mistaken as non-identical triplets because of how well we got along with one another. Were not for our appearances and obvious different dates of birth, it would have seemed like that. Whenever I was invited to an event or a get-together or sleepover at one of my friends' places, my parents were more than happy to accept, as this would give them time to focus on work and not worry about me. Of course, I always made sure to take care of a few things before leaving, like taking care of chores or homework, so I wouldn't have to worry about it later, and my parents would have a little less to worry about as well, unless I could do my homework at my friends' places. They too wanted to earn work experience, so they too did odd jobs, soon with me, to earn money and gain experience. Eventually able to be seen as more responsible enough to take care of other tasks like mowing our neighbors' lawns, washing cars, and even dog sit for our neighbors. Babysitting wouldn't come until our college years. Despite our success, we wanted to be treated like everybody else, treated normally and not flaunt our achievements or apparent fame, as that was prone to make one spoiled and even snobby, which was the last thing we wanted, as we've heard about stories about how kids would end up in serious trouble because of it. Our modest humbleness made us more well-known in that regard. Half a year pasted before Den and 𝗧𝗏, their nicknames, gave me a very special gift, which was a black adjustable choker with a fake buckle on it that served as a hidden compartment I can store little things in, like a locket or something. So that way, each of us would have an accessory we could always wear. It needn't be said that I hardly ever took off my choker from there on unless I was taking a bath or I was asleep or if there was a certain event going on that required me to take it off so it wouldn't get lost or stolen or snagged. Things were really looking up for me as well as for my friends. We were so far beyond our peers that by the age of 7 we were all recommended to transfer to middle school, which double as a high school, both of which for gifted children, which was a big leap. This was a big fat deal for all of us, especially as the school in question had a dormitory system, so we could start living there if we wanted to. Which would be another step in learning how to take responsibility and taking care of ourselves when the time came. While my friends' parents were excited and proud of us, mine on the other hand was rather lackluster. They merely nodded and accepted the transfer. It did bother me a little, but as long as they accepted it, then I guess it was okay, or so I believed. That night I came home after we had a big party at Den's house. My parents did not, as they were unable to attend to the work. I was about to announce my presence when I heard something that made me jump. Absolute not. That was my father, who screamed that as I quietly and quickly went to the kitchen where the commotion was coming from and hid beside the doorway as I listened in on what was going between my parents. No words could describe how much I wanted to unhear what I heard that night as I peeked in to see that they were sort of drunk, which was a red flag as my memories never recalled them ever being in that state, yet they were not too drunk to be slurring as they were still coherent. We can't let her credentials go to waste on something like that. She would be better off taking on an accountant or bank job. Dad argued. No. That will only make our lives a bigger wreck if her skills were wasted on something boring. Her reputation is far too well known in our neck in the woods to make her do that. The circus would be beneficial as her artistic and flexible skills would make her fit in perfectly, plus the circus is always traveling, so any chances of coming home is very low. Mom argued back. That's stupid. That would turn her into an idiot as her knowledge would go to waste and make her stranger. Accounting or bank work would ensure she doesn't lose it. Even if we don't have to worry about any of that until she goes to college, we cannot just make her do both. It would lead to a total disaster. As long as it has nothing to do with being an artisan, it won't matter, as that in itself is a waste of time and will get her nowhere. Least that's something we can agree on, as that alone will only be for naught. Though I honestly wondered why we supported it in the first place instead of just outright refused from the get-go. Mom said as both seemed to calm a bit as Dad said. With that dormitory for middle and high school, she won't be home more often, so we can relax and hopefully have a try for another kid. Any chance of the next one being bald too is unlikely, as it's rare. Asterisk chuckled, asterisk indeed. Even if we can never afford the surgery, we can at least think of other plans that will work just fine. My heart sank like an anchor as it plunged down to my stomach. I couldn't believe what they were saying. I didn't want to believe that. I couldn't help but think to myself, why would they say something like that? Why was this happening all of a sudden? They were never like this, ever. Why? Why dash? I felt myself tear up as I ran, without being noticed, to staircase, which thankfully was away from the kitchen, as I ran up to my room, not even bothering to let my parents know that I was home. The moment I got into my room and closed the door behind me without making a noise was the moment that I dropped my things and ran to my bed as I cried hard into my pillows for the first time. I didn't cry when I was getting picked on by bullies. I didn't cry when our neighbors sneered at me. I didn't cry when I would get a scrape or two from playing. I didn't even cry when I noticed that my parents started to spend less time with me or didn't talk to me much anymore. But if you think I am not going to cry after what I had heard, then you're crazy. Who in the right mind would not cry because of something like this? I couldn't for the life of me think of why they would ever think or say anything like that. It made no sense. I just couldn't make sense of it even if I tried. It was too much. They never acted like that before. Ever. And they very well knew what my aspirations were, as I had made known to them years back, and they were supportive of it. So to make a complete 180 out of nowhere like this was just jaw-dropping. Now they were completely against my dreams and wanted me to take on a job that I knew would not make me happy, as what Dad suggested was just outright boring and would drive me insane, while the other from Mom, I knew that the circus life was not all as it was made out to be. My neighbors in the village would prove that. Was my parents' co-workers giving them a hard time or making them think differently? Was it something the neighbors did? Was an issue I had no clue about going on to make them act like this? Did I do something wrong? Did my parents get replaced by imposters? Did they get brainwashed? Too many questions and possibilities. I just didn't have any answers, as all of it was giving me a headache, both from that and from crying so hard. I didn't care to check what time it was by the time I finally finished crying my eyes out, or at least as much as possible, as I still had some tears visible on my face, as I got out of bed and ate the leftovers I brought home, as I suddenly got hungry from that and I didn't want to go down to the kitchen, trying as a feeble attempt to drown out my sorrows. Thankful I had a bathroom all to myself, so taking a bath after and disposing of the wrappings and paper plates and plastic utensils from my leftovers was easily achievable. I even had a laundry hamper of my own so I can put my dirty clothes in it. Thankfully, I took out the garbage and did my laundry earlier that day, so both were empty. I went straight to bed as soon as I was finished with my bath, believing that what I heard and saw was nothing but a bad dream. At least that's what I wanted to believe, as even I'm aware that kids tend to have an overactive imagination. So who's to say that what had happened tonight was just nothing but a bad dream I had? I was out like a light as soon as my head hit the pillows. The next day when I woke up, same time as usual, 6 a.m., which was unusual for kids my age then, but it would give me enough time to get ready for school and get prepared so that my parents could just focus on themselves when they get up in the morning. I at first believed that indeed what happened last night was only just a bad dream. I believed that until I went to the bathroom to wash my face, washed as a part of my morning routine after getting dressed. I was drying my face when I saw the leftover wrappings and paper plates and plastic forks in the garbage. My heart sank again when I saw that. But foolishly I shook my head, telling myself that it was nothing, and it was probably just a bad nightmare that I had from eating my leftovers before bed. But it was when I got down to the kitchen to make myself lunch and have breakfast did I see two things that really made me tear up. First was that my parents, who were still in the kitchen but completely asleep as they were slumped over the table in the chairs they sat in as they were snoring like chainsaws, still wearing the exact outfits that I saw them wearing last night. Obviously they drank until they fell asleep. They had been in the kitchen all night and never went to bed. The second thing was that in the garbage can nearby as I neared it, I saw something that saddened me more, and this was something I forgot about yesterday. It was a card that I'd made for Dad yesterday as it was Father's Day and I had worked a whole week on making it for him, but now it was ripped in fours and just laid it there amongst the other trash that's in there. He didn't like it. Even though there was nothing wrong with it, it was ruined and thrown away. Tears threatening to fall as I was nearly ready to cry again, I pulled myself together enough to grab myself a quick lunch, 3 turkey and cheese sandwiches from yesterday along with an apple and 2 apple juice pouches, put it all into my pink insulated lunch bag and bolted out the door, not caring if my parents heard me. The fact that I had skipped breakfast altogether, or as I slammed the door behind me and ran all the way to school. Tears falling as I let myself cry while my body on autopilot led me all the way to school. Since it was very early, there were no other kids around except for the teachers and Den and Staza, as they too would come early, so we could take care of anything that needed to be done and hang out before classes started. So my best friends were the first few to see me in the state I was in when I arrived. Worriedly, they asked me what happened, yet I was unable to tell them as I just hugged them both close and cried even more. They took me to our first period class, thankfully the teacher not being there at that time, probably getting papers needed for the classes for the day or something, before they were able to calm me down enough to ask me again what happened to lead me to cry, as neither of them have ever seen me cry until then. After taking a shaky breath, I eventually told them what had happened last night and what I found that morning. They were shocked. They too didn't want to believe it just like I did. But then again, they knew as well as I knew that I couldn't lie even if I wanted to, unless I was acting or telling only what was true, avoiding lying altogether, letting people fill in the gaps themselves. And if anybody asked me certain questions, get answers I would try to stick to as close to the true as possible, never outright lying. Though the other part itself was rare depending on the case. And besides that, the 3 of us made a pact practically, as well as a promise that we would tell each other anything, even things that seem rather insignificant or even serious. We would not hide anything from each other, and would give the other the benefit of a doubt if something seems rather silly or outrageous. We were each other's confidants. They knew that my parents tend to act a little out of the ordinary, unlike most parents when it came to me, but here what they had planned to do after I graduated college was just earth-shaking. But at the time there was nothing we could do as we had no evidence of it, so any chance of getting a teacher for help or even asking authorities was out of the question, as without evidence we would just be seen as troublemakers, and it only caused more trouble to come our way besides what we were already dealing with because of our oddities. Even though we never cared about fame or popularity of reputation, we were well aware that one misstep could lead to people hating others as their lives turned to shambles. For a while none of us knew what we could do except to observe for the time being. Not just by my own eyes and ears, but also with a small hidden camera that also worked as a recorder that's just the right size to fit into the compartment of my choker. The center of the buckle was actually transparent on the inside, so getting film through it would be no problem, especially as the listening device of the piece of tech was so strong it can hear through the compartment without trouble. Any chance of it falling out was not possible, as the thing would only open if I opened it. Myself, it wasn't going to come out from getting knocked around. While it might seem a bit extreme, we needed evidence, even if this was all that we can do for now. Den had devices at home that would receive the signal from the device so that we can have everything stored and ready to go. Since we were not old enough to have phones yet, though Den's parents thinks that we should wait until we're 12 to get phones, they even offered to buy me a phone so that my parents wouldn't have to worry about buying one later. For days after that, before summer vacation, I noticed a change in my parents after that night. They never look at my direction unless they needed something, or if I needed help, only if it was very important, like something related to school, for example. Compared to before, now more than ever they never spend time with me, and anytime I would try to start a conversation they would just get up and leave the room or make up an excuse that they were busy and couldn't talk right now. They never beat me or anything like that, thankful. They still took care of my physical needs. But that was really it. Not only that, as I started to think about it more, and as disheartening as it sounds, I realized that not once had they ever said thank you to me for doing chores for them or got them really nice things. Anything handmade I made for them, like cards for example, would be torn up and thrown in the trash later after I leave, or if I made something at school like clay statues and little decorations for the living room for example, they would be given to a neighbor instead without my immediate knowledge. They would outright ignore me and treat me as if I was not there any time we passed by each other in the hallways. At least the only things they would never throw out is food I made for them, like if they needed the meal so they can get through the day until the next meal they would need to eat, or if I bought them something extra nice for them that they could not really do without, like a new coat if any of our old ones were too old or small to be used for example. They would buy me things like school supplies if I'm running low, or new clothes so that I would have something to wear as I got older, even though the clothes that they would get me now never had any designs or patterns and were just absolutely plain, usually coming in whites or grays or blacks. I wisely chose never to ask my parents to buy me anything outside of those things, no matter how much it bothered me, as, whether from tuition or paranoia, something told me they would not do that, especially after disregarding the neighbors' concerns about me not having anything stylish or something cute for someone my age. Anything I would need or want, like say I wanted like a toy or a fictional book or clothes with actual designs and patterns on them, or were just plain colorful or something like that, I would have to buy it myself. I was thankful of three things. One is that I still had an allowance from my parents despite all that was happening, even if it wasn't really much, like $6.48, though that was alright considering I was child. Second was I was a hard worker and earned money from the odd jobs I did and was smart to save up my money unless I needed to use it. And third was that Goodwill had a lot of great things to find there, so I didn't really need to go to a mall unless the situation actually called for it, but that in itself didn't occur often. Not like there was a problem there. I didn't hear any new arguments after that night, but that would not mean that it wasn't going to happen again after. Neither did I hear anything worth recording, even though the camera itself was always on. But then something happened that really changed everything, and I mean for the worst. One day, as I was doing my homework, just minding my own business after having taken care of my share of chores that involved dishes, sweeping, and doing my own laundry and washing, drying, folding, and putting away. As I was just getting started on my math homework after doing my vocabulary homework, out of literal nowhere, I heard the front door slam extra hard, which made me jump in my seat before I heard loud stomping from downstairs, soon ascending upstairs going in my direction. Dad had came home that day, was around that time as it was a half day. At first I thought he was just going to go to his office or the master bedroom to cool off, as I figured he had a very frustrating day at work and needed time to cool off. But I was dead wrong, as he suddenly came into my room, slamming the door open, making me jump again as I turned to him, only to see a look of absolute anger and hate on his face. This scared me. Never had Dad ever shown that expression before, let alone never directed at me. Did I do something wrong? Was my only thought before he did something unthinkable. He stormed in, making me flinch as he did as I braced myself for what he might do. But to my absolute shock, he wasn't going at me but was going for my closet, as he all but ripped the doors apart and took out several pairs of my clothes, specifically the ones that I bought, unlike the pairs my parents got me, before he in a fit of rage started tearing each article of my clothes up piece by piece. Fearfully I pleaded for him to stop, asking him what was wrong, begged him to calm down, but he ignored me. He even pushed me away so hard that I actually stumbled and fell backwards until I fell on the floor when I tried to approach him to make him stop. Through my tears, I kept begging him to stop, even screaming at him at that point to stop, but again he wouldn't stop nor listen even when I was tugging on his pants with all my might at that point. It was only when my mother actually came in and smacked him in the head, telling him to calm down, did he finally stop as he panted hard as sweat came down his face. She then dragged him away before closing the door behind her, leaving me alone with a pile of ripped-up clothes, not coming to comfort me or reassure me that everything was going to be all right as my tears continued to flow. The only pair of clothes I had that were not torn up were the plain clothes my parents had gotten me, and at least 5 outfits that I bought. I was just left in total confused, fear, lost, and heartache. What in the whole wide world actually happened here? Were my thoughts before I heard loud arguing coming from the master bedroom. Despite my fear and reluctance, I got out of my bedroom and tiptoed over to the master bedroom, hearing their argument as they were having a screaming match. Are you completely stupid? What the world was that about? Mom demanded. She deserved it. Dad argued back. For what? As far as memory serves, she literally hasn't done anything to rile up your anger. Even I know that what you did was very stupid for many reasons. Like what? First off, she has not done anything to make either of us mad, as she's been nothing but a well-behaved girl. Secondly, she has not gotten in trouble at school and is getting good grades, nothing to warrant our anger over. Unless you count the neighbors or even some of the students' parents' complaints about her. Forget about them, they don't count. And finally, what you did was very wasteful. Do you know how much money I put into getting clothes for her? But nothing was what we bought, just only things she bought. Same difference. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Why do you care all of a sudden? It's not like you've done anything for her outside of what's already been done thus far. I don't. But do you want anybody to see you behaving like this? This would get you arrested for domestic violence. Then send the brat away to an orphanage. It's not like we're getting any younger here. Have you lost your mind? This would only make us look bad if we send our daughter away to an orphanage despite her having a good reputation at school and even with our less antagonizing neighbors. Then what are we supposed to do? I couldn't take it any longer. From where I stood beside the master bedroom door as it was closed, though the screaming was loud enough for me to hear them very clearly, I just froze there, unable to think, feeling like my heart was about to be popped like a balloon from being squeezed so hard, or like the ground was going to swallow me up at that moment, trying in vain to cover my ears to stop listening to them and block them out with no success, tears pouring down my cheeks even more than ever. I didn't want to listen to them anymore as I bolted down the hallway to go straight to my bedroom for the second time that month, closing the door and locking it just in case before I ran to my bed yet again and cried even harder than I did the night I came home from the party. It was all too much. I didn't know what to think. It was all just a big mess that I didn't think anybody could be able to clean up. My crying thankfully drowned out their arguing as it seemed to go by before I fell asleep after crying so hard that time around. By the time I woke up, I found it was already dark outside as I checked the time, which was 8 p.m. Thankful I would not have to deal with my parents, as from what I've heard earlier, they both had a very early shift in the morning, so they needed to go to bed earlier than normal. My room was still a mess as the pile of torn-up clothes was still there. There's absolutely no hope in being able to repair all of it, though thankfully I could probably repurpose them all and use as stuffing for dolls or pillows, as 𝗧's mom was teaching me how to sew, as it would be very beneficial for me for when I got older, and at least my parents never said no to it as they too knew that sewing was an essential skill in life. With that in mind, as I turned on my desk light, I gathered up all the pieces that were torn up and put them all in an empty box, planning to deal with it later. As for my closet, now with a new fear of my belongings being torn up, I made the decision to hide my more personal items so that Dad wouldn't be able to find them and tear them all up just as he did with my clothes earlier. Anything that my parents bought would stay in the open, knowing that, from what I heard, my dad wasn't going to tear up anything that they bought, unless it was notebooks that I use for my drawings. In that case, I would hide them and keep the other ones that I use for schoolwork in visible view. I couldn't call my friends as I thought it was a little late, even though some part of me wanted to believe that they were still up, as I really needed somebody to talk to. I intended to tell them what happened if they haven't already seen what happened on the camera and heard on the recorder yet about what had transpired. My parents were very heavy sleepers, so any chance of them hearing me was not going to happen, especially as I carefully got out of my bedroom and made my way downstairs to make myself something to eat. Just because I was sad and upset didn't mean that I had to starve myself. I made a giant plate of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, saving at least 5 sandwiches to take with me to school in case I got hungry before lunchtime or to share with my friends, and a tall cup of apple juice before I practically devoured every sandwich that was on my plate. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with apple juice was my comfort food for when I felt upset or sad or depressed. At least it was a healthier alternative compared to chocolate or sweets, which were some things that I rarely had if we didn't have ingredients to make the sandwiches. But despite feeling mostly better, I couldn't help but think back to what had happened. Why had Dad done that? What the world did I do to make him so furious with me? As far as I knew, I had not done anything to cause it. It wasn't my fault that the neighbors and even some of my classmates and their parents didn't like me. I only ever did the right thing and was always on my best behavior. I was always a good girl and did my assignments and helped out whenever I could. I even helped homeless people however I could let it be by giving them extra food that I made or give them clothes and blankets from Goodwill from the money that I've earned or even sparing some change to put in their cans. How could any of that make him angry? And Mom defended me, but only because of reputation and not for my personal sake. It was just total mess. This made me worried about what would come in the future. I didn't even want to think of what was going to happen when summer vacation came, as suddenly I was not looking forward to it for once. But I had to be strong. That was something that the principal often told me after dealing with a case of bullies and even some very aggressive parents. In the face of adversity, in the face of abuse or bullies, I had to be strong and not give up even when it feels like that I absolutely want to. I can't give up and fall just because the going gets tough. I would have to rely on my head, wits, and whatever allies I had to help me through it. And Mr. Cornwall was right. He himself knew it too, as he too had to face bullies when he was younger, exactly my age back then actually. What he told me was what he learned from experience. Words can't describe how thankful I was for his words of wisdom. For without them things would be worse. I don't even want to think about what would have happened to me without his lessons. With that in mind, after I cleaned everything up after I finished eating, I ran back to my room and made sure that all my personal belongings were in a spot where not even Dad would think to look, as I knew the ins and outs in my room very well. So much so that one day when we moved there when I was 5, I discovered a secret compartment in the floor of my room where I could store a lot of things there, and that's where I stored all my stuff. Including my diary, which I have been keeping since I was 5, not only to keep track of things and write down my personal thoughts, but also as one of the ways to cope with things. I even stored in the money box that I had filled with the cash that I had earned from my work just in case. The very next morning, after making sure that the heavy rug in my room was in place of where the secret compartment was, I barely got out the door before my parents came downstairs as I ran to school after having done my preparations. My friends immediately, upon arriving, took me into their arms as they cried, obviously aware of what had happened, as I cried yet again. Their parents also knew of what had happened as well, and while they were proud of us taking action and getting evidence about what was going on, they themselves knew that we needed more evidence than this, not wanting the police to chalk it up as just a moment of rage on objects. And as well, they would do what they could to try and minimize any conflict they could help me to avoid. Though they couldn't always get me away from the house, as they themselves had work, and my friends also sometimes had extra lessons to take depending on the case. So although this would be a good time to get any more evidence I could on my parents, I knew I would have to embrace myself for what might occur. As I feared, when I got home from school that day and I was heading upstairs to drop off my things before making myself something to eat before doing my homework, I saw my dad in the room looking around as if he was looking for someone specific. While I was glad that I wasn't wearing anything that I bought myself personally, strangely enough, he never took my choker for some weird reason. The moment he looked at me when I came in was bone-chilling. His gaze, that glare, just screamed disgust and boiling frustration. The fact he didn't even say anything as he left not long after still gave me the shivers. And I feared as well that this was not going to be the last time. Days after were similar as school neared its end before summer vacation officially started. My dread continued to grow in the pit of my stomach. Having been cautious of what I do and what I say was nerve-wracking, though if it meant that no further destruction could be done, then I knew I had no choice but to tread carefully around my parents. But then to my relief, Dan and 𝗧𝗪 were able to book up a trip to California for the summer for vacation and do some work, as both parents coincidentally had to do some work over there for a while before the school year started again. It was my chance to get away, even for a while, and give myself a break, and hopefully maybe expand my artistic creativity while abroad. With that in mind, it didn't really take much for my parents to be convinced about letting me go on a trip with them to California. Much to our relief. But the night before the trip, when my parents were fast asleep, I initiated the plan that would help us further to setting things right. Before going home from school that very last day, Den's parents gave me a handful of small miniature cameras which I could place around the house in certain corners and nooks and crannies so that we can get footage of what they would do while I was away. Even if it may not be much or seem rather unnecessary. I know what you're thinking, but it was vital that we get enough evidence to bust them. We knew that if we didn't, then we would not have enough evidence to conflict them, and I knew that both of my parents had lawyers, which they got for themselves a year or two back, not bothering to get one for me, so I feared that they'd be able to get out of it scot-free. Just in case those lawyers might try anything, my friend's parents hired lawyers of their own to help us on our case in case anything went awry. We had to gather up enough evidence where not even the lawyers my parents hired would be able to deny it even if they tried. If not go to jail because they haven't done anything yet to warrant that, though maybe for a short while, then at the very least see specialists and counseling to make them reevaluate how they've treated me and how they acted thus far with having their parental license revoked until further notice. After making sure every cameras was in place, and as well making sure that they were in areas where they would not be seen right away, I went to bed after making sure that also my luggage was all packed up, including with all my more personal things stored away in it. We left the next morning without delay. As you can imagine, things had gone well for us. We had fun in California, where we were staying at for the summer. We played at the beach, made sandcastles, collected seashells, which I used to make some creative art items like small seashell mural, picture frame lined with seashells, decorative seashell paperweights, necklaces, and even earrings and such. And with both families' help, I was able to sell my artwork at a few craft fairs that was happening around those months we were there. Thus, I was able to earn lots of money, which I intended to save and only use when needed, one of the exceptions being buying souvenirs, especially when my college years came in. Even with my skills and the potential of gaining scholarships, I want to make sure to be prepared. Like the old saying goes, better safe than sorry. Even though we spend most of our time at the beach, especially when I needed seashells for my artwork, we also went to other places where we had a lot of fun. We went to have a few parks to have picnics, we went to Legoland, SeaWorld, the zoo. Went on a few ferry boat rides and even went on a tour on several ships and submarines. We had lots of fun and took a bunch of pictures together to bring back souvenirs showing our fun times there. But sadly, we knew our trip would not last forever, as about 2 days before school started up again, we flew back home. Since I was going to be moving into dorms the next day before the school day on the day after so that I could get settled in, I just left everything packed in my suitcase. Again, also making sure I was cautious around my parents, especially as I made sure to wear plain clothes when we got back. Over the summer, we recorded evidence of them sometimes arguing about me regarding my future and even making not so pleasant comments about me. Sometimes seemed like they were expecting me to be studying on business or something. Well, one day they'll see the error of their ways, even if it might take time to do it. At least I hoped. Even so, I still had some bit of hope in me that they would change back to the way they were before. I was still confused as to why in the world they suddenly made a complete 180 out of nowhere starting from when I was 5. What led them to suddenly see me as a burden and even a nuisance? Again, we still didn't find answers. We even checked, and despite how busy work was, nobody was giving my parents a hard time, neither the employees or even their bosses or even clients for that matter. As far as we can see, nothing at work was causing them to change, so it had to be some kind of outside source. Den's parents suspected that they might have a mental disorder. But for now, we don't know anything, as no matter where we look, everything just came up empty, even regarding medical as. It's still on the wait, as my parents were reluctant to go to the doctors due to their own phobias, and because we hardly ever got sick, so there was really no need to unless it was for a checkup. We can't just outright force them, as it would only do more harm than good. Upon my arrival back home, my parents seemed to for once be in a much more pleasant mood, and neither of them gave me any scowls or ignored me when I said hello as they welcomed me back and told me to do my best at school, which I replied saying thank you with a promise that I will before I went up to my room to relax, eating on the lunch I got from Burger King before getting back. What occurred there left me baffled. While it was nice to let my guard down a little, I knew better than to lay it down completely, no matter how pleasant my parents were that time around. From what I've seen, for the last 2 weeks before our return, my parents seemed to be in a better mood. Neither of them argued or did anything that now become their new norm. Something good must have came up. Whatever it was, I can only hope that it would get better enough that my parents and I could finally spend time together like we used to and reconcile. If only I had known sooner what would come during my school years. The next day, as planned, Den and Stas's parents came to pick me up as I bid my parents farewell before they picked me up and took all three of us to school. Life in the dormitory was pretty new, but otherwise was a nice change of pace, as not only did the three of us get to have a room together, but we also got to take on even more challenging tasks and lessons than the ones we took on in elementary, even with the help of our teachers for getting us more challenging tasks to do than what regular elementary school students had to face. Sure, it was a little daunting as the three of us were the only three of few attending there that were much younger than all the others, and is a little nerve-wracking, but the three of us stuck together. We knew that no matter what, things will always turn out right, even if it seemed like it wouldn't. Especially when it came to bullies. Sadly, even with the school having a strict no-bullying policy, there was still a few students who thought they could get away with everything, especially one student in particular that tried to ruin our lives in more ways than one, who did manage to get away with bullying several times. Tiffany Margarita Bernadette, a wealthy single daughter of a very famous and widely known millionaire, Pablo von Jameson Bernadette, who was well known for a line of successful chain hotels and chain restaurants that he owned. Now here's the thing, the two are polar opposites. Not to say they hate each other. No, far from it. What I mean is their personalities and even their attitudes. Mr. Bernadette was very humble and very wise despite him being extremely wealthy. He was caring and compassionate towards people, especially those who are less fortunate than him. He even donated money to charities and children's hospitals, thus making him even more recognized and well-known. Despite being a widower, he was a strong parent and did his best to try and be there for his daughter, even if he couldn't be there all the time because of work or because of important meetings with his clients and fellow workers that could not be avoided. I always understood, from the stories I heard, that something like that can sometimes have an adverse effect on one's own children and even their family members. Because with Tiffany, on the other hand, she was complete opposite of who her father was. While around her father, she would act like an obedient daughter who was kind and caring and did as her father told her, but when it came to anybody else, especially when it came to her classmates or even her butlers and maids, that was a completely different story altogether. Tiffany was mean to the bone, exactly like those snobby, rich, spoiled bullies you would see on TV shows and movies. She was not shy to flaunt her money and fame, and she always had to have a new outfit, especially if it was the latest trend from those fashion magazines, to wear each day for school, even though I'm pretty sure that her closet was so full of clothes she would be set for life. She would threaten people who would get in her way, even those who were never in her way to begin with, but she herself saw as a threat, like suing them or blackmail, the latter more than the former. Since elementary school, the same one the three of us went to before moving into the dorms in middle school and high school, her attitude only seemed to get worse, especially as she got older, that she understood that she could do a lot more than just that. The only real talent she had in school was art, drama, dance, and choir, even to our surprise government history, as she had grown up on stories from her late uncle who was in the Marines before he died sometime before middle school. Any other subjects she would cheat however she could to get good grades, though even she, despite faults and arrogance, knows that there were some subjects she had to not get suspicious on. Predominantly when it came to subjects she and her father especially knew she wasn't good at, no matter how hard she tried. So if she had to get a decent grade, she would pay a nerd to do most of it for her, with her only doing some of them genuinely, always making sure it was all in her handwriting or close enough to ward off suspicion. Those subjects were math, science, biology, trigonometry, Spanish, and French. Other subjects she would have to do it herself to the best of her abilities, which she at least did get real decent grades that were enough to pass, so she wouldn't get suspicious if she got noticed by the teachers, as they may wonder why certain students, like some that tried to avoid her, were suddenly hanging out with her. Even they knew she wasn't all that social and usually only hung out with those who were upper class. Even so, she was years older than us. She acted like she was the queen of the world and always had to be the center of attention, at least that's what she believed. It only got worse when she was 14, but more on that later. Now that I was away from my parents and would not have to go back there anytime soon, I could express my creativity with others without fear of scrutiny or of being yelled at. Although, just because I was glad to be away from them does not mean that I hated them. No, I still cared about them and hoped that they still somehow in their own way they still cared about me, despite some of the glaring warning signs that were sticking out like sore thumbs. Although from the recent behavior I had hoped that they were changing their minds about their attitudes. I would send them a letter once a week telling them how I was doing and how my classes were, never revealing the artistic classes, or classes that were artistic in their own ways, that I knew that they would forbid me from ever attending or would throw a nasty fit over if they knew. As far as they knew, they thought I was studying for office work or something. I had plans to achieve my dream and work hard so that my success would be enough to make them realize error of their ways and actually show them that art was not a waste. Though despite the lack of parental attention, Den and 𝗧𝗏𝗧's parents were the ones to fill in the role. They were like the moms and dads that I was pretty much lacking in my life. They support me and help me to further my goal. They always offer advice when I needed it, especially when it seemed like the situation was very stressful. They would always take time out of their busy schedules to help me however they could, even if it was over the phone or a letter. I do love my own parents, even if they were not showing they loved me too. Foolishly, I hoped that whenever outside source was causing them to change their behavior would be stopped so that they could go back to the way they were. To gain more skill in art and making it known to others, I went online and with help created my own page where I could publish my artwork, paintings, dioramas, wooden sculptures, embroideries, beaded pictures, jewelry, hand-sewn things, poems in the languages that I was learning, recordings of beautiful music pieces that I would create with the instruments that I was learning how to play with ease, to name a few. Den and 𝗧𝗏𝗧's parents were not hesitant to supply me with the items I needed for my dream, art or art-like supplies I would need for my work. However, to ward off suspicion from my parents, and to ensure that nobody found out that a 7-year-old had her own private website that had all of her artwork, I came up with the brilliant idea of hiding my real name on it. I would go by initials, 𝗵𝗲, never showing my real face online, never speaking in my real voice if I was requested to do song requests for any clients that I would have. Den even took safety measures to help ensure that my page wouldn't get hacked or something, putting up firewalls and viruses that would attack intruders and hackers that would try to get in. Yes, I said clients, by the way. As time went by and tried my hand in selling my art online, and needless to say my page was blown to see how much people loved my art and wanted to buy it, even asking me in chat rooms on if I could sing and if I was willing to do song requests in different languages, because there were certain songs that some people wanted to hear but couldn't get their hands on through normal means. With new vigor, I dived right into making as many masterpieces as I possibly could so I could sell them online. Thankfully, the school had a private mail office, so if there was anything that we need to send discreetly, we could send it if we wanted, if it was something that couldn't go through the regular mail, just as long as it was legal. Which was why I made the conscious effort into making sure that any item I wanted to send through the mail would be sent around the time when the mail office would open for the day, which would be much earlier before anybody else could wake up, around 4:45 a.m. My friends, in the meantime, also took the opportunity to further their goals as well. Den took extra classes and worked hard to get extra credit in science and biology and math, even helping out the teachers in those classes with setup or cleanup, as she would get to know them on a personal level and hear their opinions on those subjects to expand her horizon. She even signed up to be a tutor for them, especially when it came to students who were having trouble with those subjects, even showing them easier ways on how to do the problems from another angle that's to their pace and preference, which made her very likable. Even if she was labeled as a nerd and even if she was much younger than them, she was always willing to help out any student. Even those who seemed to be more difficult to handle, she was always willing to take on a new challenge, not only to improve herself but to practice on how she handled people so that she would never find herself in a situation where she might inadvertently snap. Despite her eccentric tendencies, 𝗧𝗏𝗧, on the other hand, really dove into sports, doing extra practices, even hang out with other teams that would stay after school to practice and improve on their skills or just have fun with those sports. She would even help new rookies so they could get a handle on the sports that they were learning for the first time. Her patience and her jolliness made her well-liked, and some even had competitive matches with her. Never a sore loser, never crying if she scraped her knee or tripped, and always laughed it off like it was no big deal, which sometimes made some of the jealous jocks mad at her, but would get told off by the more kind and hearty jocks who saw her as a little sister to them and enjoyed her company. Those guys were sweethearts and let her play with them. Not worried about her age, as she never cared about that, and wanted to be treated like an equal and treated others as such too. The gym teacher was thoroughly impressed by her, and he and the boys were more than happy to assist in her getting sports scholarships for college. The same was said for Den from her teachers when it came to the subjects that she was pursuing, and for me from the teachers that helped me to get the scholarships that I was aiming for. Thankfully, our school had multiple classes ranging from various types, even different language classes. Things seemed to be doing very well. Well, not everything, as little did we know that things were about to escalate. Tio say there was no other person in the entire world in any school who hated me more than Tiffany. That would be accurate. I still remember that day in elementary school not long after my friends transferred there. It was only about a few days later when Tiffany came into the picture. The first moment she got into the classroom did she lay eyes on me as she was eyeing her classmates. Almost instantaneously, she freaked out and screamed, which gave us all a fright as she pointed directly at me demanding to know what at that. That being me, of course the teacher scolded her for making such a mean accusation. No, she wouldn't let go as she demanded to know why a hairless freak was attending school and that she was not going to share a classroom with it, which only got her reprimanded as the teacher threatened to call her father if she didn't shut up and leave me alone, telling her that if she didn't like me then she did not have to be friends with me. Just don't harass me. But no, she didn't listen. She adamantly refused. No, she pretended to obey the teacher as the class went on. I could tell that, and one other thing I knew from there on out. I was her primary target among my friends and I. She went about trying to sabotage me in some way or another, though I would always find a way to overcome her, even acting like I didn't notice her and just acted like everything was fine, which only made her even more infuriated at me. And it never went away over time, especially when she had realized how successful I was in my classes with my friends, as the three of us were prodigies, even though she was years older than us. She, however, was unable to do anything to us if we were talking to a teacher, which we did deliberately just so that she wouldn't try anything whenever we saw her in sight. She wasn't stupid, as she already got reprimanded for being mean to me on her first day. She knew she had to be more discreet. For she may be arrogant and not so intuitive on some subjects, but she was also very deceptive and sneaky. That didn't mean she wasn't careful, though. She would obviously also use money to get her way with certain students if she did not use suing or blackmail first. Try as she might, despite how successful she was in her classes, it didn't deter us nor stopped us from achieving in our classes too, which only irked her more. When middle school came around, it became even more obvious to everyone that she disliked me and my friends, and not just because of the stink eye she gives us, though she would either try to hide her disgust, especially from the teachers, or bribe students for their silence, though thankfully not every student was a snitch. Even some students had their limits and made it clear to her to not try anything on them or she would get in trouble. More especially when it came to some of the more bolder students who were not scared to play a harmless prank on her, yet she would treat it like it was a nasty one. Though she wasn't stupid, knowing that our school has stricter no bullying policy, that didn't stop her from trying, even if not always, just so no one would be more suspicious. All because I was bald first and foremostly, and because I was more prodigal than her. Seriously, she just would not let it go. Talk about shallow and petty as all get out. Anytime she was trying to bully us directly, we would give her no reaction except for a deadpan serious expression. No action except to walk away from her, even when she demanded that we come back and face her, not flinching if she called us mean names or cowards. I was thankful she never found out about my secret online business I had on an art website that my friends recommended me, 'cause I know she would do everything in her power to wreck that. Also, with the fact that I had no social media page whatsoever, I didn't have Facebook, Twitter, nor an account on YouTube or any of that, which I think only made her even angrier, knowing she couldn't hack my account if I had none on any, as far as she knew. When we got smartphones when we were 12, I shifted all my business to that so that I could always keep my phone on me without any worry about anybody like Tiffany sneaking into my room to steal the laptop which I was using for my business. In fact, she almost got my laptop last time she tried, but thankfully we three stopped her. Said laptop I sent back to Den's parents once I was finished moving everything onto my new phone, and to ensure that the laptop wouldn't be misused for bad things. Den also created safety measures on each of our phones to ensure that they could not be hacked. The only form of communication I would have it anybody besides my secret page was the phone calls and texting. Though we had to play another card when we realized that. One day when we got an anonymous text from somebody threatening to ruin our lives, Tiffany knew that we had gotten our phones, while she had gotten hers when she was 8, as she had bragged about it a while back, and she was the one who sent us the text message, thanks to 𝗧𝗵𝗲 one day inadvertently finding out what her phone number was and matched it to the number belonging to the text. So we did something we knew that would only irritate her more and hopefully eventually make her give up, but we knew it was the only way to stay safe. We changed our numbers and continuously did it at least once a week. We may have made good friends at school, but we never gave anybody our numbers. Not that anybody minded, as we all saw each other every day, so it made no difference. The three of us were the only three who stayed in contact with each other on our phones and knew each other's numbers, both old ones and new ones that we would use. As predicted, she was very mad and seemed like she was about to pull her hair out at the fact that she couldn't get a hold of us through her phone. But we were not the only ones around our age who was targeted by her, as there was one other student who was around our age who was being picked on but was also prodigal like us in 3 different sports such as soccer, tennis, and dodgeball, in science and in drama. His name was Austin Brandon. He's about a few months older than us, but he was very kind and loyal to his friends. He was willing to get down and dirty if needed, and he was a very reliable guy. We all met him on our first day of middle school, and needless to say, we hit it off pretty well. Among any of our classmates, he was the only one around our age to join our group, as our trio became a quartet after the first couple of months we spent together. To give you a description, Austin had auburn red-brown hair that was kind of spiky on top on the right side. He wore a pair of oval glasses, had dark brown eyes, lightly tan skin. He was never without a short scarf no matter what color it was. He wore a black shirt, dark gray jeans, and black soccer shoes. His father Abraham was a very dedicated and very diligent worker when it came to archaeology. His mother Ariana was a housewife, and his grandfather Valentine on his father's side family was a retired military general. He wanted to get a scholarship in soccer, which was his favorite among the other sports he plays, as the other 2 were more like side hobbies than anything, in science and drama, so his family would not have to worry about college funds, and they were very supportive of him and did what they could to help him if he needed it, his father especially, even if he was busy and always away from home. He was wise to Tiffany's intentions when he saw how mean she was to us, even more so when she tried to bribe him with money to be her pet, which he flat out refused. He even outright announced that Tiffany was using her phone in class one day out of the blue, which made her very embarrassed when he snapped when he found the practical hate mail that she had sent the 3 of us from time to time in the trash. Tiffany was to write a 3-page report on why phones are prohibited in class afterward, and would not get her phone back until she finished, which she begrudgingly did just so that she could get her phone back and not risk having her father be involved. That only solidified our friendship that day when we were 9. When we all turned 12 when we got our phones, as her main target was to 4 of us, me especially, he knew it would only be a matter of time before she did anything more serious, and he wanted to be there for us just as we were there for others and even for him too. He too started changing his number at least once a week. Funny enough, the girls and I didn't know this until at least 2 months after the school year started, when we confronted him about why we couldn't call him on our phones and revealed it to us, and then we revealed it as well, and we all laughed about it as it was pretty funny that we all had the same idea. So it was no longer 3, but now the 4 of us made the effort to change our phone numbers and memorize each other's new ones each week so we could stay in contact with one another. It was also around that time when he had revealed that he'd been crushing on me for the last some time, which made me blush as I revealed that I too had been having him on my mind more often than not for at least half a year. Because we were too young to date and we wanted to see how it'll all turn out, so we started out small and getting to know each other. Just the 2 of us, and our friends didn't mind as they actually saw that we liked each other from the way we had interacted in the recent years. This I forgot to mention, it was around when we were 10 when we finally started high school and the classes became much more challenging, not that any of us minded as to 4 of us stuck together, and with each other's help we advanced in our classes more and more. Sure, there were times when we even hit a rock in the road. We still persevered. We 4 were well known, which didn't help Tiffany's ire nor blood pressure. Austin was well known for his level-headedness and him making the conscious effort to greet everybody he meets. The fact that he was even willing to get roughed up if it meant helping a friend out. He was a soccer star along with 𝗧𝗏 as they became competitive but friendly rivals, and if the 2 of them worked together they were an unstoppable duo as they would always win against each team hands down. If he and Den were together in science class, they would essentially be the Einstein twins of the class. If he and I worked together when it came to drama, we were the shining stars of the whole class, as our teacher repeatedly had said, not letting it go to our heads, mind you, as all of us have been taught well on staying humble and never having a swelled head, otherwise we would only be in serious trouble. We even more often than not won a lot of trophies for our school, whether it was soccer or science or for drama. We became more well known because of that, and often students ask us to help tutor them in those subjects so that they can get better grades in their classes and improve on those classes which they loved. Try as Tiffany might, she was not glamorous enough to win trophies for the school, which made her throw a tantrum. However, all was not well on home front on the day I came back home when the school year ended for the summer when I was 13. Since middle school, while my parents have been a little more pleasant as of late, that would not mean that they wouldn't get irritated every once in a while, sometimes even when I was in the same room, but wouldn't do much if I went and did my daily chores as always. I couldn't always spend my time at my friends' houses as they too had things that they were busy with, as was I. I had not even been to Austin's house yet, and would not get to until our college years as his parents lived much further away from where we lived. I had grown wiser, especially when coming up with ways to do my art and my business without my parents knowing that if I started doing business in my room, they might snap again, especially Dad, as I could not forget about the horrible fit he threw when I was younger when he tore up my outfits. So, with Austin's help, I started doing my business at a private art studio which was owned by a friend of his mother's. He was more than happy to let me use it for my business and even offer tips on some of my art and how I can improve whenever I had to go home for the summer or for break from school. Well, when I came back home that day when I was 13, I immediately saw a great change in my parents, unlike any of the time since before middle school. When my father saw me, he would glare at me as if I were a bully and immediately demand that I leave the room, which I did in fright. He even told me to when I was in the middle of doing chores, which only made Mom angry as she was one who would ask me to do it, which only made them get into an argument. When my mother saw me, she would say nothing except to stare at me as if I were a living doll. She would never talk to me. In fact, she hardly ever did, and only made gestures which I was able to read if she wanted me to do something for her like chores or make food for everyone. At least I was not getting yelled at by her, though that did not mean that she wanted to spend time with me. About a week after that day, I just couldn't take it any longer as I had to know what was going on. While in the past I never thought to ask the neighbors what was going on during the times I would come home from school during break or summer vacation the last couple of years. Because I would either be busy with my own work or because I didn't want to bother my neighbors other than going to them to do odd jobs for them still, and even going to do more on my part to help, especially when it finally came to babysitting, as the parents were impressed of how well I took care of their kids while they were away to do errands. I'm normally pretty patient, but at that point I just couldn't stand there and do nothing. When this time around it was bugging me even more than ever before, as I knew something was very wrong and I had to know why. So I went to Patricia's house, Patricia being Leona's granddaughter who inherited her house after Leona had died of old age 2 years prior. She and I both got to know each other through her, so when she died it was really a big heartbreak for us both. I even attended her funeral with Patricia, which only strengthened our friendship, even if we didn't always see each other, as she was practically a shut-in and did all of her classes online as she was in college at the time. When I came to her, she gave me a look like as if she was expecting me to come to her for information eventually, as despite looking ordinary to everyone else, she was actually a pretty perceptive spy in her own right and was even a good hacker to boot. And what she told me made my jaw drop. Apparently, not long after I moved into the dorms, my parents had attempted to have another child without my knowledge, but sadly it was just not feasible, as my mother would have a miscarriage when she was months along for different reasons every time. Being assaulted by a burglar, suddenly catching a very bad cold, accidentally tripping down the stairs landing hard on her right side, a severe case of food poisoning, and one time when she was in an accident that was so close to death that caused it, and in that order. However, what was most heart-wrenching was the 6th time she tried, and this time was able to make it through full term without any complications. It was during childbirth, however, when it happened. Due to the many times that she had miscarried, this caused the baby to have health complications, as the baby sadly didn't live not long after being taken by the doctor to get examined. This tore my parents up every single time, especially that last time. They were even more torn up when they found out from the doctors that due how bad her health had gotten because of all the miscarriages, they advised her to not try having another child again, whether through them or through a sperm donation, especially as the second one was very pricey. To them it was like somebody had torn their guts out. And they were never the same again after. I didn't know what to say when I found out that my parents had tried to have another baby, and even more so that the babies that they had all perished before they could even see the world, the last one barely even having a chance to breathe its first breaths of life before dying. I had 6 siblings that didn't get a chance to live long, 3 sisters and 3 brothers respectively. While I was very brokenhearted knowing that my parents were planning on having another child to replace me, essentially, when I thought about it after recalling the last few times they argued before middle school, but knowing now that they could not have another child because of all the misfortune that they had faced was even more gut-wrenching. Despite what they did, even I didn't want them to suffer, as that would make me no better than them, or Tiffany for that matter. She even showed me the news which got taken down not too long ago about my family's misfortune, and was kept hidden thanks to my parents' lawyers. But that didn't stop any of their neighbors from finding this out. They offered their condolences to them, even if they didn't know that they were having another child because, or me. They even recommend that they could try to adopt a child or ask somebody in the surrogacy agency to help them have another child through fundraisers, but they refused. Patricia even showed me the names that my parents had intended for each of my siblings before their untimely death, and in order: Winona, Anastasia, Brittany, Justin, Alexander, and Colin, and showed me where their grave markers were, which I decided to pay a visit and lay flowers for each of their graves. Sad that, despite the circumstances, I would never have siblings of my own, and I never even got to know any of them before they died. Though that day when I thought about it, I felt like slapping myself for forgetting that for a brief moment Den and 𝗧𝗏 were like sisters to me since the first day we met, and I was a sister to them. So even if I would never have biological or adopted siblings of my own, I would always have the girls who were like sisters to me in everything but blood. And the people in the village who I still mailed from time to time were like family too, and Austin. That made me smile, though that would not mean that I wasn't saddened by my family's decision and misfortune. So I promised myself I wouldn't let myself become depressed by this and keep moving forward, as I knew I was getting closer to college, where I can get farther away from my parents and be able to start a new life after graduation, as I had one more year before I could finally attend college. Thanks to all the scholarships I had earned through my hard work and efforts, I was able to get accepted into Harvard University. The same went for Den, 𝗧𝗏, and Austin. So all four of us would still be together in college, which was great. But things were still not well at home despite that prospect, as one day about a few weeks after Patricia showed me the truth did things get more violent. When I was just finished cleaning my room, I felt something smack the back of my head hard, as it made me stumble before I caught my desk to help steady myself, feeling the throbbing pain as I held the back of my head before turning to see who hit me. Not only did I see a rather thick book which was on the floor, which was the thing that hit me, as it looked like it had been thrown at me, I saw my dad, who seemed to be seeing red, as before I can even say or think of anything, he charged right at me, which frightened me as he grabbed and dragged me out of my room, ignoring my yelp and begging for him to tell me what was wrong and what was going on. He didn't even care if I bumped into things in the hallway when he did that. I was tossed roughly into the closet in the hallway before I was locked in and couldn't get out for long hours after. I could hear him tearing up my room, as I knew that my room was about 3 doors away from the closet I was in, and the walls were not soundproof by any means. I had no doubt in my mind that he was looking for something that belonged to me that wasn't the plain clothes that I had in my closet, which I bought for the sake of ensuring that my parents wouldn't try anything if I brought home clothes that weren't what they were expecting me to wear. I had a few ideas of what he was looking for in there, though thankfully none of my personal belongings, outside of my phone, wallet, and charger, which I had on my person, were in the house, as yesterday when I brought over all my art supplies and the things I was using for my arts, which I contained in my suitcase along with my more personal items I had to the art studio. I had forgotten to take it home with me, as around the time it was getting very late and I was more tired than usual, though my partner assured me that my things would be kept safe the next time I came after the weekend to get them. My wallet, phone, and charger at the time were hidden within the inner pockets of my pants, so they wouldn't get seen, as the pants was not only kind of baggy but also had deep pockets, so they would go unnoticed. But sadly my wallet was useless, the closet had no outlet, and my phone was dead, as I was planning to charge it after I finished cleaning my room. I even felt stupid for not learning how to pick a lock when 𝗧𝗏 offered to teach me before summer break. All I could do was wait until somebody came to open the door for me and let me out. My gut told me that Dad had caught on that I was still pursuing art and was now looking for my art supplies to get rid of them, but thankfully due to yesterday he would not find them in the house. I could only hope that he would not find out about my private art and business page, as I made a mental note to myself to ask Den to add extra safety measures just in case, and I could only hope that he wouldn't find out about other things I was hiding from him. Even though my parents never called me during my time at school, and I obviously didn't tell them about me changing my phone number once every week, that didn't mean that they never used their phones outright, as they had gotten new smartphones for themselves when I was 9. Among the ravage going on in my room, I could hear my mother coming in demanding my father to stop and tell her when the world's going on, which led them to arguing, as their argument this time were kind of muffled, so I didn't hear exactly what they were saying as they were both shouting at the same time, but I knew that they were both very angry. And I believed my friends would be able to pick it up, as I had completely forgotten that I still had the hidden camera in my choker, which I had kept on. All this time not only to capture evidence of my parents doing or saying things that were not good for me, but also to gather evidence in case of bullying, especially when it came to Tiffany, which we had stored for some time, as we wanted to wait until the right moment to send the information to her father, as despite us wanting her to be stopped sooner, we needed enough evidence where even she wouldn't be able to weasel her way out of it, as I knew that my friends, my sisters, would be able to gather this up. After hours had passed, during that time allowed myself to brainstorm on ideas for my art projects as a way to distract myself not only from the situation I was in, but also to dissuade the sadness and the hurt I felt, while nursing my sore head, regretting not having worn my helmet earlier for protection. Said helmet, which was specially made by Den's parents as a way to help protect myself in case people try to assault me in the head, and the helmet itself was yellow with a black visor, which for some reason my parents were not against, which I can't figure out. I knew I was going to be sporting the bruise for a while, but at least I wasn't suffering from severe head trauma or anything serious. Eventually, after a period of silence after the arguing finally stopped, it was my mother who had freed me from the closet around that time, as she vaguely told me that she managed to make him so angry that he eventually wore himself out and drugged his cup of water with sleep pills so that he would fall asleep so that she could free me without him getting angry. Since it was a late night around then, I knew that he would be out like a light till morning. After she told me this, she actually, for the first time in so long, checked the injury which I have received, as she saw the bruise that was starting to form. For a brief moment showed a look of concern before turning stone face again and simply told me to put ice on it and left, even though I felt sad that she didn't do more than that, and that shamefully I was starved from parental care and love from my own parents. I at least felt a little better knowing that my mother was actually concerned for my health. I did as my mother told me as I grabbed an ice pack before I went to my room to inspect the damage, as I could definitely tell the room looked as if a bear had gone wild in it. I no longer have bed frame as my mattress was on the floor and all the sheets were gone, though thankfully it seemed that Mom managed to keep the pillow from getting torn up, even if it was without a pillowcase, and there was a folded up blanket right by it, so at least I had something to snuggle in when I sleep at night. I could still tell that the bed frame, which was small and made of wood, had been ripped apart, as I could still see some tiny splinters on the floor, though thankfully there was none on or in the mattress, as I suspected that Mom had ensured that there wasn't any that was going to poke me or hurt me. My desk, while made of metal, definitely had some scuff marks from getting hit by the wooden chair, which was gone and obviously broken beyond repair. To my horror, Dad found the secret compartment that had been hidden under the rug, though thankfully there was nothing in it, though that didn't stop him from tearing the door off its hinges, leaving a gaping hole there. I can only imagine what had happened to the rug that used to cover it, as it was gone too, while my dresser, closet doors and closet thankfully didn't look like anything had been torn up. My clothes, on the other hand, the plain ones that were in there, were scattered on the floor, as it seemed like he was looking for the clothes that I bought or made by hand when I started making some clothes for myself a few times in there, not caring that the clothes he was throwing out of the closet and dresser were the ones that he wanted me to wear instead. Thankfully, the only light fixture that was in the room that was hanging from the ceiling wasn't broken or damaged by any means, and the painted walls were still intact, even if they suffered scrape marks from stuff being thrown on across it. My trash can, which was empty, was obviously kicked as it laid on its side on the floor, and the only area in my room that was not in a total mess was the bathroom, which thankfully was still completely intact, as I suspect that my mom managed to stop him before he could, as damage to the bathroom was much more pricey than damage on a child's bedroom. I didn't mind doing the clothes myself, as both my mom has already done enough cleanup to get rid of the broken pieces of wood that did not survive the ravage, and thankfully none of my plain clothes had been damaged, though were in need of a bit of dusting off before hanging them back in the closet and being put away. Didn't mind also putting the trash can back where it was, as that in itself was simple. I also found that the hidden cameras I placed thankfully hadn't been swiped or broken in their hiding places, though I did take the time to place them in new hiding spots just to be sure. I was more worried than ever, as I knew that this was only just the beginning, as I always felt that I was still stuck in the prelude of what might happen next. Days after that were just as I had feared, as I was thankful that I chose to keep my helmet on at all times, only taking off if I was taking a bath or if I was sleeping, as similar to what happened that day. He looked around my room and practically tore it apart, though thankfully nothing got broken this time, though things were now scattered about in my room as I had to repeatedly organize my room back the way it was. Thankful that none of my things were broken or torn up, as the next morning after the incident I went and asked my partner, the friend of Austin's mom, who was Pierre Armando, if I could keep my items in the studio. He was letting me use, as I told him that things were getting really complicated at home, though I did not tell him specifically what was going on. Thankfully, he chose not to ask, as he knew when to mind his own business and mind people's privacy, which I was thankful for. Dad flat out refused to eat any meals I prepared for him before my mother scolded him to stop being a baby and eat, even though he would pout, treating the food as if I had poisoned it, absolutely forbade me from going into his study or to master bedroom, and even going near it would make him throw a fit. Some days he would throw something at my head and drag me to the closet, where he would lock me up and leave me in there, though thankfully he hadn't actually hurt me worse than bruising after that day. That didn't mean that he would not do it again, as I feared that he would. It was a wonder how I had not become fearful of the dark or become claustrophobic from how many times he had shoved me into the closet. That was something I was grateful for. Due to our house being soundproof from the outside, nobody heard all the ruckus that was going on though. That did not mean that my parents would not try hard to cover their tracks to ensure that nobody knew to save themselves. Only my mother seemed to be on my side, even if it was only by the little things she did. But it was enough to know that at least somebody had my back while everybody else wasn't able to be there for me, though they and even Austin was aware of what's going on. They were all aware of what had happened and what was going on, but sadly they couldn't have me come over as they were away on different trips and wouldn't be back for a few more weeks, much to their dismay, though I reassured them that I would be fine as I knew I would have to try and fend for myself like I always had before I met them. Thankfully, there were some days Dad didn't do anything. Those were days I was able to take the time to let myself catch a breath. Although it became more difficult when I realized about a week later after the incident that Dad was going to the bank more often and not. It took him coming back frustrated, slamming his hand on the kitchen table, and him glaring at me after did I realize what he was doing. He was checking to see if I had a bank account at the bank, which I did. That I started with some help from my friends a few years back so I could store money in a safe vault and not keep it at home to risk it getting stolen. Thankfully, Den being the one who was always a step ahead of even us, there's a backup plan for if that were to arise. And that was to create a special card and store all my money on that, kind of like a credit card, so then I could keep it on my person, and any new money I would get I could just go to the bank and ask them to add it into it. Which is exactly what I did after Dad went to bed that night. It may have taken hours to get it all done in one night, but it was well worth it, as afterward I could leave the bank without any worry, paying the bank people enough money and a week's worth of cookies every morning for them to keep their word to not tell Dad that I was there and what I was doing there if he suspected it. I was relieved to not be in the house when Dad came back from his latest failure, as needless to say, he didn't want anybody to disturb him for the rest of the day while he was holed up in his study. Just because I have no intention of taking on a job as a bank person or any job involving accounting, that didn't mean that I would not study enough to know how banks work in case of an emergency like that. I'm also thankful that I put all my money under a fake name before the backup plan, otherwise I would have been in hot water. A week after that, it only got worse, as one morning when I was coming down for breakfast after doing my morning routine, Dad pushed me out of a house by force and slammed the door shut before I can get it. If the arguing I heard after that was any indication from my parents, it only meant that he was not going to let me have breakfast. Well, the joke was on him, as Pierre was always willing to make breakfast and lunch for us both at the studio, so I would not need to spend my money on food unless I absolutely needed to, but thankfully that itself was a very rare thing. But that didn't stop there. When I would come home in the evening, he actually threw hard sugar cubes at me to keep me out of the kitchen, him telling me to stay out, which again angered Mom as they went into yet another argument. So yeah, he's going to try and starve me of dinner, which he actually succeeded in, or so the both of us believed, as later on at night, as I was feeling my stomach rumbling badly, I heard a quiet knocking coming from my door, which I went to answer before I saw a plate of food on the floor, before I turned to the direction of feet moving away, as I saw my mother briefly before she went into the master bedroom. Mom wasn't going to let me starve, which I was thankful for, and I would find that the next evening the plate which I had kept hidden in the room away from Dad was gone, which I knew was Mom's doing, as Dad, being distracted with pushing me out of the house, would give her enough time to grab the plate before he can see it. And this repeated for about another week until my friends eventually got back from their trips. They had pre-planned for us to go to a summer camp which specialized in gymnastics and ballet, which provides breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and a dormitory system. Mom allowed me to go, telling her I was going to go to a summer camp, but not saying what type it was, not daring to ask Dad, as I admit that I had become more fearful of him for the worse as the years progressed. Mom would take care of him for me, knowing that he wasn't going to hurt his wife. I got stronger, more flexible, and graceful during my time there the rest of the summer before going back to school. However, after graduating from high school did her demeanor change too, and for the worse, as during that summer vacation when I was 14, it would look like that my mother was having an internal struggle with herself before she acted when I was near her. She had stopped secretly giving me dinner at night, which led me to buy myself a breakfast bar and secretly hiding it in my clothes so that I could eat it in my room at night. Getting a whole pack to hide in my room was a no-go, due to Dad always checking my room every day, which led me to continuously put my room back together after he makes a mess of it. She no longer set me free from the closet, which Dad would lock me up in for longer hours. But I could say that she didn't need to anymore now that I knew how to lockpick even from inside of a closet. Due to Dad always shoving me out of the house, I can never get breakfast or lunch in my own home, and due to him basically banishing me to my room without dinner prevented me from doing my daily chores, leaving poor Mom to do it herself, which made her even more upset with him. She stopped putting in a pillow and blanket, which Dad would always take after scavenging my room every day, for me to put on my mattress anymore, which led me to sleeping without them, though that was alright as the mattress was more than enough and the weather was warm enough at night to not need a blanket. She stopped speaking to me altogether. And she and Dad always seemed to argue every night, always in the kitchen so that I can never hear exactly what they were saying, though the camera itself would pick it up. I can't even recall how long it took me until I could eventually sleep even when they were arguing, not stupid enough to leave my door unlocked before hitting the sack. I felt more alone in my house than ever because of this latest development, which hurts more than I could admit. I dove into improving on my skills and my talents for my future occupation and preparing myself for college by studying at the library to try to distract myself from the ongoing sorrow and frustration that was brewing in me. Sorrow at my home life, which I hate as normal homes were not supposed to be like the one that I had, and frustration at my parents' behavior, which was still a mystery as we still could not figure out the problem there. But thankfully, according to my friends, I would not need to film them anymore as we could now get all the evidence to the police right on the day that we leave for college, so then we could tie up loose ends. Even though I would have liked to have this revealed sooner, I know that if we didn't have enough evidence, the police would never believe us or didn't have enough to have them put away in prison for long. But now that we do, thanks to some late-night snooping from my friends when they recorded evidence of him going to a bar getting so drunk up that he spouted everything he hated about me and about how he had treated me, it was finally about time to end it. Then came the day that I was going to leave the college, right as after getting all my things packed into Austin's family car, as his mother had offered to drive all of us to Harvard, and his mom being absolutely doting and very loving to all of us when the girls and I finally met her that day. Was leaving my room after making sure I had packed everything, did I get stopped by Dad, who out of nowhere wanted me to go up on the roof to adjust the antenna as he claimed that the neighbors had messed with it last night, not appearing angry or disgusted or frustrated or wrathful for once, which threw me off. I was confused on why he wanted me to do it, but I wordlessly did it anyway as I saw him badly sprained his ankle that morning, so it was obvious he couldn't do it himself as his walking stick was evident of that, and my mother's balance on the roof wasn't good and we didn't want to risk her getting hurt. Since I was the most nimble of the two, it only made sense to have me do it. But when I got to the roof, I saw that there was no antenna on top, but instead a satellite dish. I was confused at first before I immediately ran a thought in my head and felt my heart sink. Right as I realized that it was a trap, I felt somebody grab my foot from behind and with a lot of force shoved me to the side, helplessly sliding down the roof as I looked back at the person who did that. Dad had done it, and all with an evil grin on his face. He wanted me dead. I thought I was going to die that day, but right as I thought that, I felt somebody catch me with a hard as I, in the heat of the moment, clung my arms around the person who caught me as they held me close to them, feeling my heart pumping like no one's business as they told me to breathe in and out to calm myself as I was shaking from fear and from a near-death experience. When I calmed down enough, I looked up to see that it was Austin who had saved my life. I hugged him after he put me back on my feet, and he hugged me back along with 𝗧𝗪 and his mother, who went to check on me to make sure I was okay. Right as we broke the hug did both of my parents come out. Dad, who had discarded the cane and was walking fine now that his plan had been foiled, looking just as angry as a villain whose plan was foiled, and my mother tailing behind him trying to drag him back inside but was failing as a dirt trail was made from her heels digging into the ground. 𝗧𝗪, upon seeing them, angrily snapped, "Are you completely on your mind? You heartless monsters. You could have killed her." "Shut up. This has nothing to do with you, brat." Dad screamed back, not caring about minding his volume. Thankfully now stopped in his tracks, even though Mom was still trying to drag him back inside to not attract a crowd. "It does when you're now attempting to end your daughter's life." Den argued back, "What in the world is the matter with you? What did Mylove ever do you to deserve a death penalty? She's the villain here. Nothing but a spoiled, rebellious brat who never did a thing I told her. I made it clear that she should just give up her idiotic, wasteful dream and be an accountant instead. But no, clearly she didn't get the memo." He argued as if he had a point, but he didn't. No, not to us, as it seemed like now he didn't care about whether or not the others will know. "The only one who's the villain and not getting the memo here is you, Mr. Sanyu." Austin bite back in anger. "Her dream is not idiotic nor wasteful. All she ever did was to try and make you proud of her, to make you happy, but all you are is ungrateful and selfish. You should respect your daughter's dream. You can't force her into an occupation that will never make her happy and one that she is not interested in. She wanted all of you to be a happy family, but instead you've been nothing but unloving, abusive, and neglectful to your only daughter since she was still a child. All she ever did was help people and make them happy however she could. She's kind, caring, very smart, creative, and she's a wonderful person, and a great friend, sister, and even a wonderful girlfriend to have. I didn't quite register that he had made a proclamation that I was his girlfriend as I was searing with sorrow and anger as the arguments continued on. Girlfriend. Dad snapped as he turned to me. It's bad enough you've been a disobedient child, but now you have a boyfriend. You despicable brat. I will not allow you to have a love interest in your life. In fact, you're not allowed to be married, you blind child. And as for your so-called friends, I should have forbade you from having them years ago. They have been nothing but a nuisance and have obviously corrupted you. Cut your ties with them right now. I am your father and you will do what I tell you. Like, you can just tell her that and expect her to listen, you shameless charlatan. Den exploded. She's free to choose whatever she wants to do. It's her life, not yours. She's not your puppet you can control. You may be her father, but you have no right to call yourself a parent. She is allowed to have a boyfriend and friends who care about her like everyone else. Yeah. 𝗧𝗪𝗧 agreed. And the only one who is blind here is you and your wife. Can't you see how great she's doing around the neighborhood and even the town? Are you not aware of the stellar grades she gets at school and at the fact that she got into college through several different scholarships? How are you not proud at the fact that your daughter's prodigal? She would be the apple of any parent's eyes, and yet you treat her like she's a criminal. She should have never been born in first place. Dad snapped with his voice practically breaking at that point. At that moment my limits were at their last ends. Normally I'm slow to anger, though that would not mean I would not get frustrated sometimes, but like they say, everybody has their limits, even those who normally have a lot of patience and are well-mannered. We are human after all, so we are no infallible nor perfect. We have faults and limits. Indeed, I did snapped, not caring that there were a waterfall of tears flowing down my face as I screamed the very thing that's been weighing on my heart for so long that I've been trying to deny but just couldn't anymore. What did I ever do, Tio? Make you two stop loving me, you hateful murderers? Amidst my blurry vision because of my tears, after I screamed that full of sadness, deep-seated anger, disgust and hatred to all they've done to me, for a moment, at the time I couldn't tell whether it was real or something my mind made up in some sort of desperate attempt of seeing hope. I saw the expressions change into something I had not seen on them in so many years: severe shock, clarity, fear, and even devastation, defeat, and regret. But as I said, it was only a moment before Mom's stone face yet desperation and Dad's hatred returned as he exploded even worse than before as he screamed, "You're dead." But just as he managed to free himself from his wife's grasp and readied himself to charge at us, both of them were tackled to the ground by, to our shock, the police as they yelled, "Not so fast. Gerald and Abrielle Sanyu, you are both under arrest." The policeman holding my dad down told him as he slapped the handcuffs on him after swiftly getting his arms behind his back, not letting him get up even a little as the policeman himself was much stronger than him in physique. "Just in time, Greg," Austin's mom said with a relieved huff as this shocked us as she turned to us and explained that she had called the police long before they all arrived as Mother's intuition was really hitting her the worst this time around and saw it best to call authorities and have them watch and wait just in case. She was right to do that knowing the situation at hand. What he did and had said obviously was not missed as the police saw and heard everything that happened before they took action. While Mom did nothing but gave up yet showed an obviously displeased pout, Dad on the other hand struggled and flailed trying to break free, but the policeman holding him was not going to let it happen as he started spewing out that he was a victim of circumstances and he wasn't at fault, lying of course. It was then that Mrs. Brandon stepped up, spoke, sheer disgust plastered on her face as she told them, "Both of you should be ashamed of yourselves. Your daughter has been nothing but wonderful and delightful, yet you treat her like she's nothing but a criminal who doesn't deserve any love when really the ones who are not deserving of it is you two. All your daughter wanted was to be loved and to know that she was loved, but all she got in return was hatred even though she never did anything wrong in her life. Trying desperately to bury herself in art to try and drown out her sorrow and pain as she tried everything to make you happy, but it was never enough. Even if we may not know why you suddenly hated her even though you never did before the age of 5, and why you suddenly went from loving her despite her condition to hating her because of it without warning, the only ones who deserve to go to jail, no prison, for such villainous acts as you two. There's nothing shameful or criminal about being bald, This kind of thing can happen to anyone even if it's rare, and I would know because like her I too had that condition. Now this shocked us all beyond comprehension, especially Austin, as even he never knew that his own mother had the same condition as I. We were all speechless. Yes, she continued, I too had the very same condition as Mylove, so I know exactly what she's going through. Even if some of my experiences are different, I know the pain and struggles that she had to go through, as I too had to go through such difficult struggles in my youth. Even though I myself got the surgery to get the hair transplant so I could have hair for my own personal reasons, I never once hated the fact that I had been bald, ever, and I never saw anything shameful about being bald. She has my respect for not wanting to get the surgery because she wanted to be accepted for who she was inside and out. If you two cannot accept her for who she is, then neither of you are worthy of her love or her happiness. You're not even worthy of having her as a daughter. I absolutely will not allow her future to be ruined by likes of you two, as I will make sure that the both of you will be put behind bars for the rest of your days. As it turns out, much later after we gave our statements to the police and headed over all the evidence that we had on them to the understanding policeman, and after we parted ways as they went to take my parents to the station for interrogations and we headed off so that we can get registered at the college, that Austin's mother was actually a policeman in the private eye division at one point in her life, and was a prodigy in her time before she married her husband after her last case ended. With her parents being killed and the criminal behind it, who was also behind a severe crime of slave trafficking, was put behind bars. She never revealed it to her son because it was personal yet painful, and she wanted to wait until her son was of age before she told him. On the way to the college, she even revealed that when she was around our age, then she and her husband were also boyfriend and girlfriend, yet her father-in-law absolutely forbade them from being together due to him having a deep hatred towards bald people, because when he was younger, he was kidnapped by a criminal gang who were all bald and did horrible things to him until the police rescued him and arrested the criminals, but by then the damage had already been done, as he hated anybody who was bald no matter the reason ever since. He would only let them be together if she got hair transplant surgery. She actually wanted to get the surgery before then, because she always wondered what it was like to have hair and wanted to have hair to style, as she had a hobby of being a hairstylist in her spare time and wanted to try techniques on herself. With whatever money she was able to save up thanks to the money she had inherited from her late aunt, she was able to get the surgery without too many problems. Still, even after he had allowed them to date and later marry, his hatred towards bald people never lessened, and in fact only got worse a few years after Austin was born. Austin himself never even knew that his grandfather hated bald people, as that had been kept secret from him because they didn't want him to hate bald people too, and they didn't want him to suffer because of that. Hence why they kept my existence a secret from the old man, knowing that he would go ballistic. It was not that his parents were ashamed of it, they just didn't want me to suffer from his wrath and scorn. Austin's parents had absolutely no problems with me after getting to know me through their own son, and they were supportive of the two of us being together, and were not going to force me to get surgery, as they respected my decision. They knew that once the news was revealed to his grandfather, there was going to be chaos, especially once he found out that my parents were criminals, but they were more than willing and ready to fight for me and for their son. His parents were wonderful, as we got to meet his father too at the college, as he helped us move into our dorms and helped us to get registered and even spend the night with us so that I can get to know them in person and vice versa before the two parents went home the next day. The court case against my parents, to simply put it, was very tense. The guards literally had to put a muzzle on my father when he wouldn't stop screaming and yelling all sorts of lies and wouldn't stop interrupting us during our testimonies, even after being warned by the judge to shut up or he would be held for contempt of court. To our surprise, only Mom was willing to admit the truth, unlike Dad, even if she still never revealed the reason why the two of them changed since I was 5. Mom got 40 years of prison while Dad got a life sentence due to him being so interruptive and not willing to speak the truth at all. He was even warned by the judge that one more act of crime would earn him a death sentence. Our days in college after that were good. We had many fond memories there and met a lot of good people who became friends with us. Many of them even felt sorry that I had to suffer because my parents hated me because of my state of being. We were also well known there as our reputation from our last school, as it was apparently made known to the principal there, and even from some of the students who went to the same school as us, and the news just spread like wildfire. Though there was still the one downside we still couldn't shake off. Tiffany was at the same college as us, much to our dismay. Though we still did everything we could to not let her stop us from achieving our dreams and doing our work, as she still tried to put us at the bottom of the food chain. She managed to win some of the students over to her side from spreading rumors about me and my friends or paying them expensive gifts, But most of the student body stood up for us, as the college too had a strict no-bullying policy, and many of the students there were anti-abusive. They knew that we were not the enemies. However, Tiffany just wouldn't stop, as her attempts to put us down only got worse, especially as we kept foiling her plans each time. She stuffed lockers that she thought were ours full of balloons full of moldy paint, only to realize later that none of us had lockers, and the only thing that was accomplished was making the lockers smell very bad. She tried to steal our homework from the finish bin, only to get caught by the hall monitor and, due to having forgotten her hall pass, was forced to put them back where they were when he saw that none of the papers were hers, in an attempt to not get sent to the principal's office. Try to trip us downstairs with tripwires, only to backfire badly, as she ended up inadvertently tripping over several handfuls of students down the stairs and was forced to back out so to not get caught, and thankfully the students that tripped only got out with some bumps and bruises, with only 8 having broken something in their legs with no fatalities listed. She still tried to find information about us in regards of having an account any social media site on the web, only to find none, as the 4 of us didn't have an account on any on them, and trying to hack into our phones through hers was a no-go, as the last few times she tried she had to get a new phone due to severe viruses hitting her from her attempts, as she had to get a new phone at least 20 times, with a plausible excuse to go with why she had to get a new phone each time to her father, with the 20th time being her last, as her father really was becoming suspicious and she had to stop doing that altogether, due to all of us having our phones on our person at all times, never leaving them alone even in our dorm rooms. She tried to send hate mail to our rooms, only to get caught by security, who would not allow students back into their dorm rooms during class time unless it was a free period, and the security had a list of which students was supposed to be where, so there's no way she could come up with excuse to go to our dorm rooms, as she was forced to go back to her class. And during those times when we did have a free period, which is when hers was, she would not be able to slip hate mail into our rooms due to us putting towels under the doorway to ensure nothing could get slid under, as this only made her very mad, as it took everything in her to stop herself from throwing nasty fit and just shoving every hate mail into our room, as there was always a security guard patrolling the hallways. She tried to accidentally spill food all over us, only to either have us dodge it altogether, or if we were hit then get no reaction from us, as we simply just got out of our seats and moved away from her, which made her even more angry and made her look like a fool, and even more the fact that she would not be able to go into the bathroom to film us getting cleaned up to do something nasty to us on YouTube, as the girls and I would guard the boys' bathroom and he would guard the girls to ensure that that wouldn't happen, thanks to a story that we saw a while back. She put a vase full of red spider lilies on our desks before we arrived at our respective classes, only to get swiped away by the teachers, who knew all too well what the flowers symbolized and demand that the students tell them which one of them put the flowers there, only to get nothing, which would only earn them several hours worth of detention as punishment, which made the students who did have the same classes as us, who were some of Tiffany's followers, to hate her for getting them into trouble and eventually leave her, as they couldn't stand it any longer after her last 10 attempts. She even also outright teamed up with a new teacher during our second year in college to try and make trouble for us, as he genuinely hated us, which only after gathering enough evidence of him being horrible to us, with the final straw being him outright failing us even though we did well on our tests, to get himself arrested and fired after the first 2 weeks with no evidence of Tiffany being involved, as she managed to rat him out. Thanks to us, the students who were a part of that class too, which was science, showed respect to us and admire us for protecting the school from a horrible teacher was also being nasty and horrible to them, which obviously did nothing to cool Tiffany's ire. As time passed, she could never succeed in putting us down and making us look like the clowns, trying to outdo us with no great success, as we would always triumph every time without trying, as none of us were trying to compete against her, as we were just doing what we always did, ignoring her, as she was becoming more and more like a 5-year-old who was spoiled rotten and throwing a nasty tantrum for not getting what she wanted at every turn. She knew she couldn't get us expelled outright without anything to pin the blame on us for, nor even bribe the principal, as he was a dear old friend of her father's, so therefore he was absolutely against bribes of any sort. Then one day in our 3rd year in college, as her jealousy, hatred, disgust, greed, envy, and selfishness reached the breaking point, she just couldn't stand it any longer and tried to outright kill us by putting up fake posters and banisters of us in inappropriate and humiliating situations as distraction, before she tried to drop a literal ton of bricks on us, as we were only just barely able to escape with our lives. This, however, got her in deep trouble, as the principal actually spied on her doing it and caught her red-handed at the moment the brick failed to kill us. It was at the principal's office where the 5 of us were escorted to the gang, and I gave him all the evidence of her doing horrible and nasty things to us and even some student body for years, as this really angered him knowing that his best friend's daughter had been doing such horrible things behind their backs and nobody stopped her. He went ballistic and screamed at her face with reprimanding, unremorseful disappointment for being horrible student and daughter, telling her that she was not going to get out of it, as he had revealed that he had sent all the evidence to her father immediately via email on my phone after seeing all the evidence, and before he reprimanded her for a whole half-hour straight, which horrified her knowing that her father was undoubtedly on his way now. She screamed in anger before she stormed out of the office as he called the security to go catch her and went into apologizing to us for all the trouble that she had caused, and we told him that it wasn't his fault as he had nothing to do with it. He promises that he would make sure that she would get a serious punishment. First things first being her getting expelled and obviously serving time in prison for a long time. Not just for the bullying but also for the harm she had caused to us, the student body, and the damage done them and on the campus up until that incident. Promising us that he won't let this happen again. He'll make sure of that. But then we heard a loud vehicle roaring to life as that startled us, as this made us turn to windows only to look in horror as she was driving she knew expensive hybrid Chrysler Pacifica hybrid in a rouge red finish with steel reinforced armoring in the front of the vehicle, straight where the principal office was, which was on the ground floor, and where we were at as all of us ran out of there before it crashed through the walls, destroying the office altogether. Unable to move now due to the rubble, she got out of the car and screamed at us. "You filthy, snot-nosed, good-to-shoot, spoiled, worthless freaks. You ruined everything. You've been nothing but a thorn in my side for too long, and I am not going to stand it any longer. I am going to make sure your lives are ruined just as you ruined mine. I'll make sure all of you get the death sentence and die slow and painfully for all the horror you brought on me. All of you deserve to die for your existence." Tiffany Margarita Bernadette screamed the voice of her enraged and disappointed father, who had dirty blonde hair with some gray hairs in between, lightly tanned skin, dark blue eyes, and wearing a fresh, clean-pressed black suit with a white undershirt, black tie and black dress shoes, as he was right at the doorway next to us with several policemen, as that made her stop in her tracks as her face turned severely pale as fear overshadowed her, making her realize what she had done right in front of her father's eyes, as it was obvious that he had seen and heard everything that she said. She was really going to get it, and nothing, not even her batting eyes, hair in a bun and skin which were exactly the same as his minus the gray hairs, nor her hot pink designer sundress with tall black heels, nor anything she may have had under her sleeve was going to get her out of it, as her father yelled. "How could you? How could you do something this horrible? In fact, how could you do something so absolutely horrible for so many years? And right under my nose at that. I never taught you to bully and abuse people to get where you want in life. I taught you better than that, but clearly you never listened. I am absolutely disappointed in you, Tiffany. These people never did anything horrible to you, yet you saw fit to torment them for your own selfish and inexcusable desires. It's clear that I was blinded to your ruse, as deep down you've been nothing but a selfish, spoiled, bratty, greedy, jealous, gold-digging, tyrannical bully, clearly, who doesn't know the first thing about real love and compassion." "No, please, father." Tiffany tried in vain to beg her father that she was not at fault when she clearly was. "Please wait, please. I didn't mean to do it. This is all a big misunderstanding and dash." "Shut up," he screamed as she jumped pathetically in fear as she was trembling as he continued. "You will not get out of this scoff-free, young lady. Not after all that you did. I'm honestly ashamed of how you turned out. You are a disgrace to this family." This horrified her beyond comprehension, and even more so when he told her that she was not going to get a cent of his money as he was cutting her money expenses, and she was not going to get a single penny out of his wallet, will, or his inheritance, as he was going to give it all to his adopted yet more kind-hearted, gentle, wise, and humble son he had adopted 2 years prior, who she had neglected all that time. She tried in vain to make him give her another chance, but he was not having it. He demanded that she apologize to us, but she wasn't doing it, as she tried to save her own, but instead of making up for her own actions. Clear as day to anybody, and her father, who was heartbroken that she didn't regret any of her actions, not even a little. She was expelled and arrested that day as she struggled to get free, and was spewing lie after lie as nobody listened as she was carried off to prison. Her father gave us a public apology for her actions and promised that she was never going to do harm to us or anybody ever again, as he would make sure that proper justice was served. We in return told him that it wasn't his fault as he had no knowledge of what his daughter had been doing all that time, though he stopped us saying that he should have been aware as he felt horrible for not realizing his own daughter's actions sooner and realizing that his time away was also the cause of her state. He promised that he was going to be a better parent and make sure that his son was not going to become anything like his sister, because even though he didn't cause her to become the way she was on purpose, it was still his fault as the parent for not noticing sooner and not taking proper actions to prevent it from getting worse. He truly a sincere and kind man, and especially had no trouble in complying with the police to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and paid the principal for compensation and to ensure repairs could be done for damages that was done because of her. The day was let out for all the students after that as the principal announced that everybody could have the week off so that repairs could be done and give everybody time to de-stress after all of that. It was that night that the girls and I were invited to Austin's house for the first time to have dinner and relax from all that had happened, and even offered to let us stay for the week till we could all go back to college, which we accepted. They lived in a simple but very nice and well-lived modern home in the suburbs, with the inside being much larger than what it looked like on the outside. Sadly, that was also the night when we met his grandfather for the first time, and needless to say, he was not pleased to see me. He immediately snapped and demanded to know why I was there, and upon hearing all that happened that day and at the fact that I was his grandson's girlfriend, he angrily demanded that I be kicked out and my family should never have anything to do with me ever again, only to be stopped by his son and daughter-in-law as they defended me, which only made him angrier. But Austin's parents were ready to defend us. Austin even stood up to his own grandfather, who he used to admire and love, and told him to back off as he was dating me and he was not going to stop him, and he had no right to be terrible to me as I had never done anything to deserve being hated at. His parents and grandfather argued for hours after in the next room, as the four of us just had dinner without his parents, trying to ignore the screaming that was going on. No one said a word, especially not Austin, as he was devastated at the horrible words that the man had said about me, and was upset at how he was acting. Just because he was already aware about him hating bald people, that didn't mean that he wouldn't be upset, especially after that incident there. Only me and the girls comforted him as he openly accepted it. His grandfather never let up as he kept harassing me, treating me like a slave, trying to force me to do chores for him, only to be stopped by his children, until one day, with not or anything, Austin's grandfather moved out of the house, and nobody knew where he went. As much as this saddened Austin's parents, they knew that there was nothing they could do about it as he brought it upon himself. If he was going to be immature about it by doing this, then he was the one who was the fool, not us. We never saw him again after. We even thought that he was never going to show his face again, or so we foolishly believed. Tiffany's court case came days after that. She still refused to admit the truth and lied to make her look like the victim instead, but no one believed her. She never even apologized for her actions. She begging for her father to give her a chance, but he refused. With our testimonies and the evidence gathered from us, and with many of the students testifying against her, including all of her former pets, she was sentenced to 40 years of prison for abuse, deep levels of discrimination, blackmail, bullying, an attempt of cyberbullying, bribery, endangerment of fellow students, and several attempts of murder. As for those who used to be on her side, they got lighter sentences compared to her for some of the troublemaking that they caused for her or because of her. They would be serving 3,000 hours of community service and would need to retake any tests that were done by other students for them, as the teachers managed to catch on to that. They honestly admitted that they were perfectly fine with it, that they regretted how they acted and for the misdeeds they did, and promised to work to be better Samaritans. And they indeed kept their word. The rest of our time in college was a lot more peaceful and rememberable after all of that, especially as me and Austin's relationship got stronger and stronger as time passed, and our love for each other never wavered. If there was ever a problem, we would always talk it out to come to a consensus and avoid a major argument altogether, knowing that those would lead to a big mess to clean up after. Or worse. But on the day of our graduation today, we would realize too late that that would be the worst day of our lives. What was supposed to be a day of new beginnings turned into a day of endings. In the early summer of May, we were all gathered together for the graduation ceremony in front of the college. We were all in our graduation uniforms and were very excited of the day finally coming where we can all make the next big step in our lives. The gang and I had everything planned out. We would hang around and chat with the other students after we receive our diplomas and the ceremony ended. We would drive to the village, which I would be seeing everyone for the first time in years so that I can introduce the gang to my village family, and we would all celebrate as everybody there had planned a party for all of us when we got there. After festivities, we would go to sleep, and in the next day we would move into our new apartment where we would live there until we each gathered enough money to live on our own. As we pursue our respective dreams, we would present our work with the respective areas and share our work with the world essentially. Later down the line, have families of our own and stay connected even when times get rough. Sure, we were aware that there might be complications down the line as not every plan survives the battlefield head-on, but we knew that no matter what we would overcome them. How naive were we to not realize what those complications would imply? After we received our diplomas, having been chosen by the staff, I was supposed to give a speech to conclude the whole event, but I never got to as right as I was about to read the speech that I had written. My ears picked up a faint beeping coming from the podium, which prompted me to look inside the cabinet underneath, only to be met with a bomb hidden inside as my English teacher, who also saw it and was met with fear. And I immediately screamed to everyone to get off the stage as we all bolted, just barely escaping the explosion as everybody screamed and freaked out, trying to get away from the blast radius as more bombs were set off, as it seemed they were coming from underneath the stage as they blew the stage to smithereens, with only the standing raptors having survived the impact. I had no doubt that everybody could agree that this was most certainly not a way to conclude a graduation, as half of the staff got extinguishers to extinguish any flames and embers, while the other half and everybody attending called the authorities such as policemen, firemen, and hospital personnel to come and help us. You know the drill. The police questions everybody there, asking them what had happened. Doctors and nurses checked everybody to make sure they were all okay, and thankfully there were no fatalities, though a handful of people, both those attending and students themselves, had a couple of burns here and there. Fire department check, make sure there's nothing flammable nearby and make sure that there were no other dangerous substances that could explode and such. The whole thing took hours before we all have permission to leave, with only questions left behind, wondering who in the world was responsible for an attempt of murder and endangerment of innocent lives. Despite what had happened, the gang and our respective families, except my biological one for obvious reasons, decided it would be best we head to the village to go to the party to de-stress from when it happened, chatting along the way to ease the tension as slowly the event was tucked in the back of our minds. Thanks to the advanced technical car that Den's father had made, that he had created himself, which had yet to hit the market, as it would have been the thing that would make her father the most advanced scientist in the world, we were able to get to the village in only a few short hours. Everyone there greeted us with open arms as the mayor welcomed me back and welcomed my gang and their families as we all moved on to the festivities. I regretfully had to tell the mayor about what happened to my parents, as he was horrified before he mourned for them suddenly becoming criminals, even though years back he knew them as kind and gentle souls who were diligent workers and would do anything to provide for their families, giving me his condolences before we both agreed that it would be best if we did not say anything to everybody else, as they would be heartbroken and wait on a later date to tell them, as that night was supposed to be a happy one for us all. Everyone had a great time. Den's family met some fellow researchers as they were in a very complicated conversation that nobody had any hope of deciphering. 𝗧's family got to know many people who were contortionists and fellow sports freaks. Den and 𝗧 entertained the children by telling them stories that got them laughing as they did this, so that Austin and I could have time for ourselves, as I got to introduce him to people along the way, seeing old faces and meeting new ones as I made a conscious effort to memorize the faces of everyone that was there, as we eventually got to spend time with one another alone, as I led him to the water fountain, which was at the center of the village, that was working very fine despite its appearance looking very old and well-aged. As we sat by it just gazing at the moon quietly, it was then that Austin gazed into my eyes as he told me, "My love, words cannot describe just how wonderful you are and how much you've made my life a lot brighter and cheerier since the day we met. You and your friends welcomed me into your gang, and we became a family, looking out for one another, and were there for one another, especially in times of adversity, whether it was your parents, Tiffany, or even my own grandfather. You three are an inspiration in your own right, but to me you're the one who inspired my heart. Any man would be grateful to have you as a girlfriend. You're kind, caring, clever, very artistic in many different aspects. You're always willing to help anybody in need, no matter how much it asks of you. The way that you sometimes act like a detective when it came to mysteries only makes you more interesting and admirable every time. To me, it doesn't matter whether you have hair or not. It's not your appearance. It was your heart that I loved. The true beauty that lays within that shines forth, making you beautiful inside and out. You don't need hair to show just how wonderful you are. And I cannot think of any other girl I want to be with for the rest of my life, which is why I want to ask you a very important question." I was already in tears, deeply touched by his words, As he got up before he knelt down on one knee and pulled out a box before he opened it, revealing a beautiful ring which had an amethyst gem in the center on a golden band, and asked me the very words that I thought I would hear when I was older. Mylove Nozomi Sanyu, would you do me the honor of being my wife, to be Mrs. Mylove Nozomi Sanyu Brandon, to one day have your hand in matrimony when we are of age, to be together for forever and always until death do we part? Through my tears I smiled as I felt my heart soaring with joy as I told him yes before I knelt down and hugged him as we both shared a gentle kiss full of love. It had been the best moment of my life. It would be something I would always treasure. If only that moment could have lasted longer, especially with what came after. We decided that we would surprise everybody as something to end the party as I put the ring in the box in my suitcase before we got back and joined in with the festivities. But a few hours later, just as we were about to announce the big surprise to everybody, overhead we heard what sounded like a plane flying over us, sounding very close to us as we all looked up. I could tell it was a bomber plane for the military, but I had no hope in knowing what type it was due to my lack of knowledge in military plane history, as we were all wondering why in the world would there be a bomber plane flying over us, as none of us got any news about there being a war going on that needed a bomber plane. But to our horror, the underside of the plane opened up, revealing the bombs as we all realized that they were about to drop down on us. Earlier that evening, the mayor had told me about how early that morning they received a generous donation of supplies from an unknown supplier that included 5 crates worth of fabrics, 10 crates worth of pots and pans, a giant case full of numerous seeds to plant, and about 50 barrels of gasoline. And barrels themselves were placed in different parts of the town, which was kind of strange, but the mayor figured that it was so that those driving would have easy access to gas, as we didn't actually have an official gas station, as we only had a small shed where you can fill up your tanks one at a time. Too bad none of us actually realized that they were placed there on purpose, as everybody ran for their lives as the bombs hit, and the explosion which caught the barrels and the crossfire made even more flames burst as they quickly consumed the village in a sea of flames. Austin, Den, 𝗧𝗏 and I were helpless as we ran for our lives, forced to watch as everyone one by one was consumed by the flames. The smell of fire, gas and wood burning, and even the smell of flesh being burned and turned to ashes permeated the air, had no hope of being able to block out their screams of agony, pain and fear as they seemed to pierce right through us. Even their own families were being consumed by flames, yet they told us to keep running and not look back, even though we did. We kept running as we were in tears, our eyes as we kept running for our lives, trying to block out the smoke as we coughed every once in a while, trying to keep our mouths covered. Desperately, we ran towards the end of the village so we can escape. Along the way, we didn't find even one person that was still alive as the screams continue to fill the air. We try our hardest to not look in the direction of where the screams were coming from and risk seeing more people being consumed by the flames, being burned alive, dying all around us. All I could think of as I ran was, why in the world was this happening? Who would do something this horrible? No one here did anything to warrant this. We didn't want any of this. We're innocent. It was then that, to my great horror, as we ran there was a sudden explosion that separated me and Austin from Den and 𝗧𝗏, as I could do nothing but watch as the flames obscured them from my vision, and hear their screams until they were suddenly cut off as if someone had hit the pause button. It was only Austin who was able to keep pulling me, saying we had to keep running, knowing that even though this was horrible, no matter how much we wanted to go back and find them despite knowing they were dead, he and I knew that they would want us to and get out of there alive no matter how much we wanted to go back. Even we knew to our despair and grief that the situation was completely hopeless. Words alone can't tell how much I wanted to grieve right then and there from all of it, yet I had to swallow it for the sake of getting out of there in one piece despite getting burned here and there. I knew Austin felt the same way, as I could see tears falling down his face. Yet the look of determination was plastered there as he kept pulling me along as I ran behind him, as we kept running for what seemed like an eternity before we finally managed to get out of there, meeting the chilling yet welcoming summer breeze as it hit us like a torrent of water. Despite that relief, we didn't stop running. It was only after we reached the car, which was parked a good ways away from the village. It was only then, amidst our panting, that we looked back in sorrow and horror as more tears came down our faces. This was a living nightmare, and both of us wanted to desperately hope that all of it was just that, a nightmare, and that we would eventually wake up and see everyone was okay and nobody was killed. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that that was not the case at all. What we faced was real. Even in our anguish, we saw the flames were starting to spread outside the village as we knew that we had to get away and call for help. We could break down in more tears later. Austin drove while I used his phone to call 911, since there was no time to reach for my phone as it was tucked into my suitcase. I told the operator what was happening and that they had to send help immediately, and the operator told me that they were already getting calls about this, as they've been getting calls from several people who were on a plane who, along with 120 others, had witnessed the horror that happened far below them, so they already knew and help was already on its way, much to our relief. But that was short-lived, as all of a sudden we heard multiple gunshots which scared the daylights out of us, hearing a few even hitting the car as we realized that they weren't coming from the ground but from above, as Austin was trying desperately to not get hit, though that was very difficult as we couldn't see where they were coming from above, nor could we risk looking out the window and get hit ourselves. The operator, who was hearing all of that going on, hearing the gunshots and our screams, urgently asked what was going on. But just as I was finished telling her what was happening, a lone bullet which managed to pierce through the car's roof pierced right through Austin's phone, destroying it in the process, cutting off the call abruptly and scaring me even more as I let go of it in fright and shock as I yelped. Thankfully I wasn't hurt, but that didn't change the fact that we were now on our own unless I could reach for my phone. But I couldn't even do that, as before I can even attempt to try and crawl into the back seat to reach for my suitcase, several bullets managed to hit the tires as we began to swerve out of control, until eventually we went tumbling as the car went rolling until it crashed into a nearby patch of a forest, laying upside down. We were sore, obviously bruised, and feeling like we had whiplash, but otherwise alive. I was still trying to process everything and stop my head from pounding when Austin, who managed to keep his head together and get out of his seatbelt, carefully helped me out of mine as we managed to break the window from my passenger side so that we could crawl out. It was only thanks to him that I didn't faint nor foolishly remained in that car any longer, as it suddenly exploded after taking a few more hits from a few bullets which were blocked by it. We can now confirm that the bullets were now coming from ground level and not from above, as we ran as far as we could before we hid in a thick patch of bushes trying to catch our breaths. How he managed to grab both of our suitcases in the midst of all that, I knew I wouldn't be able to tell, but I knew that we needed them for one main reason. Both of our suitcases, as was everybody else's, were 100% bulletproof, so we can use them as shields. Silence befell us as we were trying to keep our voices from being heard, fearful that if we made even a peep we were toast. The two of us could do nothing but hold each other close, shivering from not only the cold winds that blew and from pure fright, heart pounding at what feels like 1,000,000 miles a minute. After what felt like an eternity, while in real time I think it has only been maybe 3 minutes or so, we heard footsteps from a distance, as we heard several pairs of feet as their shoes were making crunching noises from the twigs and gravel that they were stepping on. We heard voices soon after, but were left in deep-seated shock as the voices, which there were 4 of, with them being the voices of 2 men and 2 women respectively, sounded like 4 people we knew all too well. "Ugh. They got away," said a very displeased woman who sounded like she's around her early 20s. "They were not in the car, so it's obvious that they managed to get out before it exploded. They couldn't have gone far, not in the condition they're in," said the voice of a man around his late 30s as he speculated. "We can't let them get away, especially not Austin. That girl needs to be put down before she brainwashes him any more than she already has," said the voice of a desperate yet angered old man around his 80s. "Especially as that little tramp ruined our lives all because of her goody-two-shoes attitude. She's been nothing but a freakish stuck-up since day one. People like her don't deserve to live, as they are a waste of time and only cause nothing but ruination," said the first woman. "I always said that bald people were no good whatsoever, and considering what happened to each one of us, it only just emphasizes it. Forget cancer patients. Their baldness is a conspiracy against us all," said the older man in disgust. "Even your daughter-in-law?" asked the woman in her 20s. "I always never considered her a daughter. I never liked her even before she got the surgery. I only tolerated her because she consented to my demands before marrying my son. How foolish of me to not see that she had been poisoning him. Sadly, my son was too late to be saved because of her, but at the very least I can save my grandson from that pest," said the older man. "Pity we couldn't annihilate her at that graduation. Pity still we couldn't just drop all this on her head on the way to that nobody village," said the first woman. "Quit your yapping, you two. We're wasting time here. The sooner we find them, the better," said the younger man. "Why won't any of you guys listen? This is too much. It won't matter whether they get away or not. We're going to be in serious trouble. None of you made any effort in hiding the fact that all this was your doing. We'll all be arrested if not put to death for this," said the voice of other woman who was around her late 30s, who sounded upset and urgent. "You already got rid of the village and everyone in it. Only they remain, they'll be all alone. Isn't it enough that now they have nobody to turn to? Tiffany, Dad, Austin's grandfather Valentine, and Mom. They were there. Mom didn't want this, but those three, they killed everyone we loved. They committed mass genocide to kill me. They didn't care who had to die. They didn't even care if any of their loved ones were involved in the crossfire. They didn't even care if they got caught, especially as, according to Mom, none of them made the efforts to cover their tracks. All they care about is killing me, as if I were a sinister monster that needed to be slain to end a curse. I was even more horrified and shocked than I was before. Mortified even. What they did in the past was horrible enough, but with this new development, no words could describe this other than the clear fact that they truly were villains now. Only Austin, who held me closer, was able to ground me and keep me from completely breaking down or going to complete and utter shock or fainting. Those monsters, how could they do this? Those heartless savages. He whispered in shock and deep anger, which made me shiver, as this was the first time that I ever heard him in such anger, excluding the time he was angry at his grandfather before he vanished a while back. Then, without warning, we heard a deafening smack and hard thud hitting the ground as we listened in. Shut up, Abs. It's not. It will not be enough until she has breathed her last pathetic breath of air. Dad yelled at her, not caring that my mother was now whimpering and sobbing as the others joined in. Yeah, like seriously, will you just shut up and let us get to the main part of this? Tiffany scorned at her. Indeed, you've been nothing but a complainer since this morning. All your nagging is giving me a headache. Valentine scolded. Besides, why do you care now after all this time? Dad asked, uncaring and unremorseful. She and her so-called friends and boyfriend had put us in prison. She made our lives miserable through the townspeople before then. She pathetically tried to win our love through gifts she buys for us and didn't take the hint until then. She continued to follow a worthless dream that we have made clear time and time again to not pursue. Why now, after all this time, would you care about that rebellious, disobedient, good-for-nothing child? Because she's my daughter. My mother tearfully snapped, which made us froze as she continued. She is my flesh and blood. Despite everything that's happened, she is my child, my baby. I will not condone for all the actions that we made against her. Never again. Even when try my hardest to be there for her, even if it was rather lacking. Killing everybody just to get to her is going way too far. Mrs. Brandon was right. She never did anything wrong in her life, as the only ones that at fault for our misery is everybody who was against her from the start. The ones who are at fault for our ruination is ourselves. Unlike all of you, I love her. I'm fighting with every fiber in me to defend her and Austin from the likes of you, myself and him. I never want to hate her. Bang! The sound of a gun shooting scared us greatly, as we did everything we could to not let out a scream which would risk giving our hiding spot away. As we turned around to peek through the bushes, only to be met with the sight of my mother now on her knees, holding her now bleeding left leg as blood seeps through the wound from her shin, while tears fell down from her eyes as she cried, as we saw that the one who fired the gun, which was a Walther PP, was none other than Dad, as it almost seemed like. His eyes turned completely red with malice as he grinded his teeth. The very sight of this tore me up. One more word out of you, and this next bullet is going to go through your head, wife or not. No one will stand in our way. He threatened her with sinister intent. Everything within me was screaming to go and help her, but I had to stop myself, knowing that if I go out there now I would die. Knowing that my mother still loved me, that she never hated me, nor wanted me killed, and she was trying to protect us now, made me want to be there by her side and disregard the consequences. Mom. I thought sorrowfully as we pulled back quickly. But we made the grave mistake there, as we accidentally stepped on some twigs, which made a lot of snaps as we froze. We didn't have time to duck down, as they immediately spotted us as we turned back like deers turning towards headlights, as their gaze was now pointed at us. You. Dad seared as he pointed his gun at us. But then, without warning, my mother, with every ounce of her might and fighting against the pain, leapt at my father and held him back while she tried desperately to point the gun away from us, as the two struggled violently. Mylove, Austin, run. Mom screamed desperately in tears as she managed to wrestle her way, while hanging on to him, towards Tiffany and Valentine, as she made them fall over by crashing into them hard. I wanted to go back, but I knew otherwise, as me and Austin got up and ran running as we heard gunshots being fired, but thankfully none of them hitting us thanks to both Mom and the suitcases which were on our backs like backpacks and the helmet I wore. We still felt some grazes whenever they hit us, but otherwise we still kept running. Sadly, neither of us were paying attention due to blind sorrow, fear, shock, and panic as a thick tree root caught my foot and caused me trip and fall. I could do nothing but turn back as I hurried to get back on my feet as several things happened all at once in the span of a moment. Dad, after shaking his wife off of him, shot the gun twice. Austin shielded me as one hit him, the indication being him grunting deeply in pain, while the other one was reflected by the bulletproof suitcase he wore. Said reflected bullet went sailing back at the group as that very bullet struck my mother in the chest near her heart. I barely had time to process as Austin collapsed at my side as I went to him, only to seeing that the bullet had struck him at the side right near his heart. Whether it struck directly or grazed it, I couldn't tell as he was breathing heavily and started coughing up blood as he held his wounded side. No doubt the bullet also hit his lung and was starting to fill up with blood. Austin. I screamed helplessly, not even realizing that I hadn't stopped crying at all as it only got worse. Mylove, cough, you've got to run. He urged me to as his voice began to strain as he used every ounce of energy to look up at me as he was coughing very badly. Boodash. No but. Cough you asterisk cough you must keep going. Cough you must live. Even cough even if I cannot coughing harder. You must live. Don't let this legacy die with you. Even cough even if I couldn't be with you till the end. Cough don't die. Austin. I love you. Cough Mylove. Nozomi. Sanyu. His voice became fainter as I could do nothing but watch as his life was slipping away from my fingers. It was only by a loud screech of distress that got my attention as I turned back to the group as I saw Valentine struggling to get back up as he held his knee, apparently suffering from some sort of injury there. Tiffany, the one who screeched, was fussing up and down over her new outfit getting dirted up as she whined like a 5-year-old losing their kite in a tree. And my father just standing there in horror upon seeing his wife being struck down by the other bullet as my mother now holding her chest, blood dripping out of her mouth and the wound on her chest as she struggled to get back on her knees with her other hand holding her from falling as she looked in my direction. Mylove, I am sorry. I never stopped loving you. Don't die because of us. Run now while you can. She desperately screamed, fighting back the pain before she vomited blood right then and there. Mom dash. I tried to shout but Mom cut me off as she and Austin, with every ounce of strength, screamed Ruin. So I did just that, despite wanting to say no and collapse. I've leapt my feet and ran with everything I had left in me, fighting back the emotional and mental exhaustion I was suffering from. Focusing more on getting as far as I could, not daring to turn back knowing that that would get me killed as I heard more gunshots and lots of yelling. Blinded by tears as at that point, as my energy was getting close to being completely spent, running and crawling on my hands and feet at that point to get away. Desperately, not able to tell where I was going as I eventually heard the group of 3 coming in my direction as I kept pushing harder to get as far as I could. To get help. To get away from them. To live to see another day. The gunshots got closer as they were nearly on top of me, but then out of literal nowhere, it felt like the ground opened up from under me as I fell through the darkness as I could do nothing but flail helplessly as it was dark all around me with only a glimmer of light at the end as everything went black as I got closer to the light. You know the rest from there. Never have I ever felt this heartbroken in my life after hearing a witness story. I kid you not, I'm in tears right now. In all my years as a police detective, never had I ever encountered a victim of severe circumstances such as Miss Sanyu. What she went through is far too saddening to describe. What's worse is that thanks to my quirk, I know that every word that she said to us both is true. One of the downsides of having my quirk is knowing the truth, even when it sounds absolutely heart-wrenching. It's equal parts a blessing and a curse. While I don't regret having my quirk, sometimes I would like to just shut it off for once so to give myself a break, but I can't. Among any innocent civilians who have gone through the absolute worst in their lives, even the quirkless ones, never have I met any who've gone through something absolutely outrageous, horrible, devastating and severe, such as what she has been through since childhood to what happened recently. It was bad enough that her own parents were giving her such grief, more her father than her mother, but her school bully and her fiancé's grandfather as well. Their actions are uncondonable. No sane villain would ever go that far to kill somebody, as far as I know. Sure, there's been bombers and people who killed lots of people in a room or a house, but never have I met any who would be insane enough to drop literal military bombs on top of a village, town, or city to kill one person, disregarding whoever gets on the crossfire and whatever repercussions come from it completely. Even the most insane villains that I have arrested and seen would never go that far. And mind you, most of the villains that I've arrested and seen all had quirks. Rarely was there any quirkless ones. But what those three did to this poor, poor young woman is beyond inexcusable and unacceptable and illegal. I have half a mind to go to her world and arrest those three myself, to make sure they pay for their crimes for the rest of their lives. But I can't. But at least I know, despite not knowing how in the world she ended up in our world in the first place, that they cannot hurt her anymore. And I know for a fact that I'm not going to send her back if I have the power to, knowing what's waiting her there. That would be like sending a sheep to the slaughter. Miss Sanyu was finally safe and free from them, but not without being broken up so badly. No doubt she was going to need all the help she could get, and not just therapy, mind you. Her wounds, her scars, and I don't mean physical, were deep and would take time to heal from. I've no doubt that, based on how well she's been cooperating with us, she won't reject our help. But for now, that can wait, as right now this 18-year-old was in need of comfort as she close to having a complete breakdown after finishing her story, and she was trying so desperately to not fall apart as she tried in vain to wipe away her tears which wouldn't stop falling, and I understand that she feels like she won't be able to put herself back together if she does. To fall apart sounds scary to victims who've been through more than what most people have been through in their lives. Miserable, heartbroken beyond reasoning, hurting, lost, devastated, defeated, upset, in emotional and mental agony, sorrowful and deeply wounded at the heart. No one to turn to, no one there to hug her and comfort her, to reassure her that everything was going to be all right, touch-starved, exhausted, hurt, and afraid. She lost her family, not including her father, her sisters, her friends, the village she was born in, her fiancé, everything, all in one night, over there, but it's broad daylight here. And on her graduation day, a day that was supposed to be the start of a new chapter in one's life, especially as she graduated at this age, she had her whole life ahead of her, everything planned out, but now it's all wasted, and all because of them. I was about to go against protocol and go to her side to give her a well-needed hug. But Toshi, who was in tears himself, beat me to the punch as he was already at her side just when I was about to do the same, getting seated in the unoccupied chair as he carefully picked her up and placed her on his lap as he held her close with the right arm around her body while his left hand carefully but soothingly caressed the back of her bald head. Understandably, she froze up from this, but eventually she realized she wasn't in danger and allowed herself to relax before more tears fell like a waterfall as she then clung to Toshi like her life depended on it as she buried her face between his chest and his right bicep and began to cry her heart out as Toshi held her closer. The least I could do is offer some comfort by placing a hand on her shoulder and rub it reassuringly as she cried with no restraint. She had every right to, and neither of us were going to stop her anytime soon. She needed this. It felt like hours went by, though in real time I think it's only been maybe an hour and a half. I sort of lost track due to there being no clock in the room, and I left my watch on my desk due to the battery having run out hours ago. During the past near 2 hours, I couldn't help but feel very upset and angered. All of her suffering was all because of one thing, and I don't mean quirklessness because where she's from no one has a quirk, period. It wasn't because she did anything wrong. It wasn't because she broke the law. It wasn't because she committed a crime by any means. It was none of that. It was because she was bald of all things. Bald. There's nothing illegal or wrong about being bald for some reason or another, whether by an accident or from medicine for chemo or because of a quirk or something like that. And yet those three, those monsters, decided that being bald was a crime and went too far. They didn't need quirks to commit a crime. They did it by their own hands. They are the ones who are in the wrong, not her. All she ever did was the right thing and pursued her dreams of being an artist on multiple levels, yet those three literally didn't care and saw her as a waste of space, a pest, a nuisance, a criminal who had no background to go with it. She was none of that. I've no doubt that they would be sentenced for life, if not then receive the death penalty. I wasn't the judge, but those two would be the likeliest outcomes they would receive in court. Eventually she stopped crying, though she was still in tears as she sniffled, and I have no doubt that this would not be the last time she would cry out like this, having trouble trying to breathe through her nose due to her crying, so I offered her a handkerchief which she accepted before she wiped her eyes and blew her nose very hard. Now able to breathe through it again as she folded up handkerchief and handed it back to me, which I accepted and stuffed it in my pocket intending to wash it later. Sorry, she said softly. A few tears were still visible in her eyes, but thankfully they weren't falling, though her face was now red from all of her crying. I noted mentally that you can really see just how red her face could get without hair to cover it up. No doubt it would get redder along with her head if she were blushing. It's okay, I reassured her, wiping away my own tears discreetly. You don't need to apologize. You had every right to cry, especially after the literal living nightmare you were forced to face. He is right, Toshinori added. Honestly, I would be very concerned if nobody cried after going through what you went through. Likewise, she agreed. I don't not ever want this to happen to anyone. I wouldn't even want it to happen to my own worst enemies. What I went through was bad enough. I don't even want to imagine how anyone else would react if they were in my place. We agreed with her. Unlike her, I've no doubt that there would be others who would get angry and probably try to take things into their own hands, or worse, maybe snap and go on a rampage. Or worse still, commit suicide. It was wonder how she was still sane after all of that. Like I said, during those times your show was one of a few things that I would turn to help cope with the situation I was in. Remind me that there is always hope even in times of adversity. I also read books, stories, fanfiction, and did anything artistic to help express myself and let out my emotions without any repercussions, as I don't ever want to take my emotions down on anyone, especially if any were negative. She told us. Are the others fans of it too? I couldn't help but ask curiously. Who isn't? She asked rhetorically before she chuckled, said, Yes, as I have said before, your show is one of the most popular anime in the whole planet. Anybody, especially anime fans, knows and loves it. Austin was the one who introduced me to the show a few years back, and I've been hooked since then, albeit there are some rare moments where I do not approve of, but otherwise everything else about the show is amazing. In fact, you two are actually two of my favorite characters, so meeting you two in real life is a real treat. I couldn't help but laugh. Not really too surprised, as Toshi did the same. It shouldn't be a surprise, as I've met many people, and especially children, who have often wanted to meet their favorite characters in real life. But hearing her say that I was one of her favorite characters made me feel flattered. I've no doubt that she's a huge fan of Toshi, as I didn't need Quirk to see that in her eyes as she was trying her hardest not to blush as she realized that she was on his lap and in his arms, and proceeded to apologize, and him telling her that there was no issue here as he let go of her yet still had his hands on her shoulders for comfort. I was also trying not to chuckle more, knowing that it wasn't the first time that Toshi had female fans who had feeling for him. Whether she was aware of the expression she was trying so hard to hide or not, I wasn't going to voice it out to spare her of the supposed embarrassment she would feel. I could tell that she was somebody who didn't want to be wishy-washy, knowing that falling in love with a fictional character served no purpose, so meeting her heroes in real life, now knowing that they were real, was no doubt making her feel rather conflicted. I don't blame her, really. Anyone feel the same. Just then there was a knocking at the door that was behind me as I turned to it and said, Come in. And in came Sansa, who had a distraught look on his face. What he told us shocked me but quickly sent a chill down my spine and made my blood boil at the same time.